Chapter 228. GOR Chapter 214. The man that Su Ling fancies, Shea was stunned. In this kind of situation, the normal conversation should be, "What is your name?" or "Thank you for saving me," or something along those lines. Additionally, because the question was too strange, Shea forgot that she was speaking Byzantium. "I don't think so," Shea subconsciously answered. Su Ling's pair of big eyes stared at the man and she quickly continued. "Then, do you have your own property? I mean, you have to have at least 2 goats and a bow. It would be best if you also have your own mount. Otherwise, I fear that you won't be able to feed your family." Shea felt himself becoming confused. He blankly replied, "That, my property is at least more than that." Su Ling's eyes grew brighter. "Then, are you an adult?" "I am 19. How is your archery? Also, do you know how to hunt? How many steps can you throw a spear?" "About 100 steps. Accuracy is not a problem," Shea casually replied. "Phew." The young Zaku girl finally felt relieved. Her face revealed a look of joy. Under the moonlight, she could see the bruises on Shea's arms. The corners of her mouth curled up slightly, and she revealed a satisfied smile. "And it seems you are very popular. The feather on your head, did you get it tonight?" Shea rubbed his hands. He began to suspect something. Is there something wrong with this Zaku girl's head? Is she scared out of her wits? Or was her brain damaged by those bandits earlier? Su Ling, who had been untied, jumped up and walked around Shea twice. "And your oil painting is not bad. You also have a talent for painting. Do you also like the winged totem? You are the same as me. Oh, it seems we have something in common. And you are an outsider, right? But it doesn't matter. Father doesn't forbid us from marrying as long as you can afford the betrothal gift. And, oh, by the way, my teacher taught me to be honest, so I have to tell you the truth, I'm not very good at doing things. I've never cooked before, and I don't know how to knit fur jacket. I'm best at cooking bamboo rice. But don't worry, if we're together in the future, I'll definitely work hard to learn." The girl's eyes lit up as she talked to herself. But in the end, Su Ling's words about betrothal gifts were clearly heard by Shea. The country bumpkin widened his eyes and shouted, wait a minute. Hey! Wait a moment. What did you just say? Betrothal gift? Of course, if you want to be my husband, you have to give me a betrothal gift. Husband? Shea's jaw almost dropped to the ground. That's right. Su Ling let out a long sigh. Her face revealed an excited smile. Then she suddenly hugged Shea's neck and happily threw herself into his arms. She said loudly, "You're my man." The country bumpkin was dumbfounded. Husband? Giving her body to him? Damn. Although the hero saves the beauty and the little beauty gives her body to him, damn it, although this is not unheard of, but isn't this too fast? In the past, when I heard those legends, it's not like I haven't heard of this before, but just a second ago, you save a beauty from the hands of a villain, and the next second, bang. The beauty says to you, "Let's get married." I understand. Shea sighed and calmed down. He looked at the girl and said in a serious tone, "You must have accidentally hit your head just now." Shea felt that he must have met a lunatic. That's right. This girl is a lunatic. The girl's eyes were shining as she calculated how many sheep they should raise and how many children they should have in the future. Shea felt that if he didn't leave now, there would be a big problem. Thus, without saying a word, the country bumpkin suddenly turned around and ran. Seeing the man she had her eyes on suddenly run away, Su Ling became anxious. She had finally found someone who could help her out of this predicament, so how could she let this guy run away? Moreover, he looked very majestic and valiant, and his appearance satisfied her. Judging from the strangulation marks on his body, he was also very popular. If she could have such a man, then the girls in the tribe would definitely be jealous to death. Wait. Su Ling was panting as she chased after him. Wait. You still haven't asked for my name. Shea quickened his pace as he turned around and shouted, "I think you must be sick. You should hurry back and find your father." The country bumpkin was depressed. Damn it, saving a chief's daughter should be a good opportunity, but he didn't think that this woman would be a lunatic. Thinking about it carefully, why did he keep meeting crazy women with problems in their heads? And there was that big sister called Nei, who tried to marry him the moment they met. And now there was this chief's daughter? Ah, right, there was also Merlin. That old woman was also a lunatic. Don't run. My name is Su Ling, hey. I'm talking to you. Su Ling was really anxious. She ran 2 steps faster and suddenly hugged Shea's neck from behind. She jumped onto the country bumpkin's back and wrapped her slender arms around Shea's neck. She anxiously shouted, "Don't run. Don't shake me, I'll get dizzy." Shea struggled with all his might, lifting the girl from behind his back and throwing her in front of him. Su Ling was thrown to the ground by him and began to cry. At this moment, the two of them had run quite a distance away from the pond. Some people in the distance had already noticed the commotion. Su Ling's crying was immediately heard by some people. After a few whistles, a group of Jakku men ran over. Some of these Jakku men were unarmed, and some were Jakku warriors who were in charge of guarding. After hearing the commotion, at least 17 or 18 of them ran over. When they saw this scene, all the Jakku men showed expressions of righteous indignation. Everyone recognized Su Ling. In the tribe, the chief's daughter had always been the dream lover of all the young Jakku men. At this moment, this beautiful girl was sitting on the ground. Her hair was messy, her face was tear-stained, and her face was full of panic and grievance. More importantly, because of her struggle when she was kidnapped, Su Ling's clothes were a bit messy. Tonight, she was only wearing a leather skirt and a fox-skin coat. After struggling for a while, the rope around her chest was loosened, revealing half of her well-developed and round breast. The deep cleavage was faintly discernible. Well, we can imagine this scene. In the pitch-black night, in a remote and quiet place far away from the crowd, a beautiful girl was crying helplessly. Her clothes were in a mess, and beside her, a man with a robust body and a fierce face was standing at the side, looking down at her from above. At this time, what would a normal person think? Even Shea himself felt that this scene was too easy to cause a misunderstanding, because he had clearly felt the flames of anger and undisguised hostility in the eyes of the surrounding Jakku men. "Hey, wait, I didn't that." Shea waved his hand, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Unfortunately, he forgot one thing. This was the Jakku tribe, and there were very few people who could understand his Byzantium language. Soon, a Jakku man roared angrily and rushed forward. With the first one taking the lead, the rest immediately started to act. Several guys rushed in front of Shea. Some directly punched him, and some simply opened their arms to hug Shea. Shea just didn't want to cause a misunderstanding, so he didn't resist. He tried to explain something, but he was soon pushed to the ground by a few Zakku young men. These Zakku people looked extremely angry. A few of them were tightly entangled with Shea, and some even grabbed stones and threw them at Shea's head. Shea didn't care about misunderstandings this time. Although he knew that his body was very strong, he was not interested in using his head to compete with stones to see which was harder. With a few bangs, several young people were quickly bounced away, but the rest of the people rushed forward one after another. Soon, fists and feet were in a mess. More than a dozen people wrestled together on the ground, almost like a mountain of meat pressing Shea under it. Country Bumpkin tried his best to resist, but these Zakku natives were extremely tough. His arms were twisted by 4 of them, 3 of them were on his legs, and 2 of them were riding on his back. One of them pulled out a dagger and tried to stab his waist. Damn it! Do they really think Lao Tzu is a pervert? With a bang, several figures flew out, and several figures were directly bounced away. Shea struggled, kicked the guy who stabbed him with a dagger, and then said angrily, "Hey! If you don't stop, Lao Tzu won't be polite." Shea raised his hand and sent 7 or 8 strong young warriors flying. This kind of divine bravery immediately made Su Ling, who was sitting on the ground, to look at him with shining eyes. The little girl's eyes didn't conceal the light of excitement and adoration in them. Too brave. Too mighty. This is the man that I, Su Ling, fancy. If someone noticed the little girl's expression at this moment, her eyes were almost in the shape of a heart. The commotion here attracted even more people. These jackmen were making a big fuss. Although She didn't understand what they were saying, but thinking about it carefully, it was probably nothing more than, molest catch the pervert kill this pervert and so on. To be honest, the country bumpkin felt that this fight was really a bit useless. If he used a heavy hand, these guys would at least have a broken leg or at least a few bones. But he came here to make friends, not to make enemies. But although he thought so, the Jacumen didn't think so. Since they couldn't beat him with their fists and feet, the valiant Jacumen didn't hesitate to use weapons. The Jacumen ran over from behind and brought weapons, short swords, daggers and even short spears, bows and arrows. Shea had just knocked away the people in front of him when 2 short spears stabbed in front of him. He opened his arms and clamped the 2 short spears under his armpits. He forcefully twisted them, and with 2 caca sounds, the short spears broke. Shaya immediately kicked out with his feet, and the 2 guys flew back while shouting, and in the process they also hit 5 or 6 people. But when Shea landed, a short sword almost grazed his scalp, and the country bumpkin broke out in a cold sweat. His whole body was smeared with dragon's blood, and even his crotch was smeared with dragon's blood by this wretched country bumpkin, but only his head wasn't. If his head was chopped off, Shea didn't think he had the ability to recover. A few strands of his hair were cut off, and Shea was really angry. At this moment, a group of Jacumen had already formed a circle around Shea with spears in their hands. They saw how powerful Shea was, so they just held their spears and kept shouting, getting into formation. They were like hunters facing a fierce beast, ready to kill this guy. Forcing Lao Tzu to hurt people. Shea was very angry. Finally, several short spears came stabbing at him. Shea could only do his best to dodge. At the same time, he grabbed a spear and twisted it, snatching it. He swung it in a circle, and immediately, it broke into pieces with clanking sound. More than 10 broken spear tips fell to the ground. Shaya swung his fists and knocked down 2, kicked down 3, and grabbed one guy's neck, clenched his fists, and punched his opponent's head. At this time, Su Ling, who was sitting on the ground, finally came back to her senses. Ah! With a shrill scream, the young daughter of the chieftain suddenly jumped up, baring her fangs and brandishing her claws as she charged towards the Jacu warriors. Bastards! Stop! Stop! Su Ling, quickly hide, this guy is very powerful. The leader of the Jacumen shouted, and rushed forward with a short knife in his hand. From his expression and tone, as well as the way he looked at Su Ling, it could be seen that this guy was one of Su Ling's admirers. But at this time, Su Ling suddenly jumped up. This delicate-looking Jacu girl suddenly became like a female leopard baring its fangs. She flew up and kicked the Jacuman's crotch. The man screamed and dropped his knife, covering his lower body with both hands. But then Su Ling punched him in the nose. The pitiful Jacuman had no choice but to use one hand to cover his nose, which was spurting blood, but it wasn't too late. Su Ling elbowed her opponent in the stomach. The pitiful man fell to the ground. You can't hurt my man. Bastards! Who told you to hit my husband? Su Ling stood in front of Shea like a female leopard baring its fangs and brandishing its claws, angrily shouting. Shea was stunned. This girl looked delicate, but she was actually so fierce? The 3 consecutive attacks just now, kick to the crotch, hit the nose, and hit the stomach. These 3 consecutive attacks were executed in one go and were extremely practiced, but even more of the Jacumen were completely stunned. The scene suddenly became extremely cold. Man? Husband! For close to half a minute no one spoke. Everyone stared at Su Ling as if they had seen a ghost. Finally, clang! The short spear in the hands of one of the Jakku men fell to the ground, and then more people dropped their weapons. There were also more than 10 people who had been beaten up by Shea lying on the ground. They cried out in pain and struggled to get up. Su Ling, you said, he is your man? Your husband? Finally, the youth Jack, whose head had been beaten up by Shea and whose neck had been grabbed by Shea, probed. Of course. Su Ling puffed out her large chest and proudly raised her chin. The Jakku men all began to shout, and for a moment, curses and anger in their native language were endless. Shea looked at the scene. Although he didn't understand what they were saying, he felt that the situation was more or less clear. He threw away the poor guy in his hands and sat on the ground to catch his breath. Su Ling quickly shouted and gestured for a long time. Then, she pointed to the side of the pond and announced, "Where is the bad guy who wanted to kidnap me? My man is the one who saved me." Well, what could be more embarrassing than this? But fortunately, there was still a way for everyone to vent their anger. When they heard that someone had actually tried to kidnap the chief's daughter, and that it was by the pond, most of the Jakku men seemed to have found a way to vent their anger and rushed to the river. Soon, miserable cries could be heard from the river in the distance. The bounty hunters who had been beaten down by Shea fell into the hands of the angry Jakku men. Their fates might not be so lucky. This matter was only an interlude in the bonfire festival. Soon, the festival continued. However, Shea was politely invited away by a few Jakku warriors, along with Su Ling. In the huge tent, Shea once again saw the great tribal chief, who was in pain because of his weight loss. When he walked into the tent, the great tribal chief was struggling to throw away a half-eaten deer leg. He then sighed and had the beautiful Jakku girls leave. Soon, only Shea and the father and daughter were left in the tent. To be honest, from their physique, it was hard to believe that they were father and daughter. How could such a mountain of flesh give birth to such a delicate daughter? Think about it, how could a big mammoth give birth to a little snow rabbit? I already know about the matter. Those who dared to kidnap my daughter will get the punishment they deserve. Moreover, I want to thank you. The great tribal chief continued to speak in a calm tone. Tell me, how should I express my gratitude? What do you want? Perhaps some gold? I know all of you outsiders like gold. Shea thought for a moment and said, I need some magic kistaros. At least 10 of them. The great tribal chief thought for a moment and said, Okay, although I don't know what you want them for, I can promise you that. But the tribe doesn't have them. I can allow you to enter our forest area and pick them yourself. I will send a guide for you. Oh, I am a fair tribal chief. As the leader of a tribe, fairness is a must. The value of the magic kistaros you want is too low. It is not enough to take the credit for saving my daughter. So, I have to reward you with something else. Shea grinned and said, In that case, gold will be a very good thing. Very well, I will give you a lot of gold. My daughter is very precious to me. The great tribal chief smiled kindly. In fact, he had always looked very kind. He looked like a mountain of meat, as if he was born with a harmless temperament. Father, Su Ling cried out. She looked at Shea and said, I want him to be my man. I have decided that he will be my husband. Shea felt his scalp go numb. He looked at the great tribal chief. This was bad. The great tribal chief would most likely get angry. Oh! A calm voice came from above. Next, the huge mountain of meat moved. The great tribal chief looked at Shea and said, Sounds good. Although I don't know how you managed to win my daughter's favor. Wait! Shea was shocked. He stared at the great tribal chief and said, You are not angry at all? Angry? Why would I be angry? The great tribal chief smiled kindly and said, We are Zaku people. We are the children of mountains. We are born to advocate freedom. My child. We Zaku people have the right to pursue what we want. My daughter, although she is my daughter, she is free to choose any man she likes to be her husband. However, according to tradition, we Zaku people do not marry outsiders. However, as the great tribal chief, I can give her special privileges. This is the only thing I, as a father, can do for my daughter. That's it? That's it? That's it? There was no thunderous anger, no roaring, no anger. There were no words like, damned outsider, you dare to covet my daughter. Oh, then I can help you get married. Ha ha. The great tribal chief became happy. I like weddings. After the bonfire festival, there will be a few weddings. It is always a wonderful thing. Wait. Shea didn't know whether to laugh or cry. But you still haven't asked for my opinion. Oh. The great tribal chief raised his chin. What do you mean? Yes, that's what I mean. Shea coughed. That. I'm sorry, but I can't agree. I don't want to marry your daughter. After saying that, Shea sighed inwardly. Damn, things are always unexpected. He had actually refused to marry his daughter. That had probably angered the great tribal chief. That's a pity. The great tribal chief still sighed, but he didn't seem angry. You aren't angry? Shea felt that he really couldn't see through these Zaku people. Why would I be angry? The great tribal chief laughed. You don't understand us, my child. We are Zaku people who like freedom. My daughter has the right to like you, but you also have the right to refuse her. Do you understand? Freedom is the only thing. Su Ling looked at Shea with disappointment. You actually refused me? Why? That. Shea said vaguely. There is no special reason. I just don't want to marry, not now. Father. Su Ling looked at the great tribal chief for help. After thinking for a bit, she suddenly smiled happily. You can send someone to tie him up and throw him into my tent. Is that okay? Last time, when I wanted a pony, didn't you send someone to tie it up and give it to me? The great tribal chief sighed. My dear, you have to understand one thing. A husband and a pet are different. Do you understand? He doesn't want to marry you. Unless you make him change his mind, I can't force him to do anything. There is no doubt that Su Ling is the second female lead. Perhaps some people will doubt it, but I can confidently tell you that in at most 20 chapters, I will make everyone like this girl. Speaking of which, the important female leads only appear or start their scenes very late. This is almost my personal style. For example, Yang Wei in Wicked He. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 229. When Todoro woke up, his head still hurt so much that he wished he could cut off his head with a knife. The pain of a hangover was obviously unfamiliar to magicians. After groaning twice, he turned over and hugged his head with his buttocks in an attempt to continue sleeping. But then a foot kicked his buttocks. Splash! A basin of cold water was poured directly onto Todoro's head. The dazed magician suddenly woke up and screamed as he jumped up. Awake? Good morning. Shea, who was holding an empty basin in his hand, stood at the side and looked at Theodore with a smile. Todoro was originally filled with anger, but when he saw Shea, he could no longer vent his anger. His expression suddenly changed, and he hugged his head and sat on the ground. Good morning, master. It seems you had a good time last night. Shea put down the basin and sat beside Todoro. The magician's face turned red. Because the experience of last night was indeed very inappropriate for a mage to do something like that. Last night, Todoro participated in the bonfire festival of the Zaku people and was quickly defeated by the enthusiasm of the Zaku people. As a magician, Todoro may have many problems, but at the very least, he never drank. Although he was lazy, he had always been very strict with his private life. This was the same for almost all magicians on the continent. But last night, he could not remember when it started. When the first Zaku native laughed and stuffed a bowl of fruit wine into his hand, and when he was still hesitating, several other Zaku natives squeezed his neck and poured the wine into his mouth. With the first bowl, the rest was much simpler. The wine made by the Zaku people was very dry, even a little sour and sweet. Todoro drank very happily, but soon, he began to lose his mind. He vaguely remembered singing and dancing around the fire with a large group of Zakus. He hugged every enthusiastic Zakus around him. Everyone laughed and shouted. Although they didn't understand what the other party was saying, the scene was unusually harmonious. When they talked about happy things, they grabbed the wine jug and drank a few mouthfuls fiercely. That feeling of floating and the feeling of joy all over his body, as if all the pores on his body were about to open up. Todoro had never tasted such a wonderful feeling in his life. He even remembered boldly hugging several Zaku girls, and even plucking up the courage to kiss 2 of them on the face. Then, there was more laughter, more dancing, and more wine in his drunken state. He felt as if he was no longer Todoro, no longer a lowly, incompetent, and cowardly low-level magician. He felt as if he was an omnipotent great magician. He was carried by several Zaku people, constantly thrown up and down, shouting, laughing, and chanting a lot of spells. The most terrible thing was, he seemed to have taken off his clothes and ran back and forth around the bonfire. It seems like that happened. At the thought of this, the magician's face turned red. Too shameful. Too shameful. As a magician, how could he do such an undignified thing? Master, last night Shea smiled. You were drunk last night. I didn't do anything special, did I? I remember. Shea's smile revealed a trace of slyness. Let me think, you seem to have said some things and done a lot of things. Let me think. Oh right, last night someone took off his clothes and ran around the bonfire. Haha, but then again, Todoro, your butt is so white. The magician's head was already buried to his knees, but Shea's next words made Todoro's face turn pale. Later, it seems that someone jumped on the stage and said that he was a great magician, that he was the strongest magician in the world, that he would defeat all the great magicians in the world. Let me think, it seems that someone also said that he would take Merlin as his 18th concubine. Alas, if such words fell into Merlin's ears, I'm afraid it would cause the Witch Queen to be very unhappy. Todoro's face was already pale, and he could not speak. The country bumpkin sighed. Say, if I tell this matter to Sir Merlin, can't say. Todoro screamed like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. Can't say a single word? Can't say a single word. Todoro was extremely anxious. If Merlin knew, he would be prepared to be a frog for the rest of his life. Oh, and someone also said that one day, he would bring people to attack Odin, attack Odin's divine city, capture the Emperor Odin, make the Emperor Odin his coachman, make the chairman of the Magicians' Guild his apprentice, and make the Pope clean his boots. What else? Todoro's teeth chattered. I said all these? That's not all. Shea grinned. Someone also said that he was not happy being a servant right now, and when he became a magister in the future, he would make that country bumpkin called Shea clean the toilet bowl for Lao Tzu every day. That's right, that's what he said. Todoro's face had completely collapsed, and he hurriedly grabbed Shea's hand, crying miserably. Master, master, I didn't have that kind of thought. I was just drunk and confused for a moment. Don't worry, I won't punish you. Shea shook his head, looking very magnanimous. Todoro raised his head and looked at Shea anxiously. Actually, don't you feel that your body is a bit strange? Do you feel that your head is especially painful? And your whole body seems to be faintly aching? And hearing Shea say this, Todoro suddenly felt that his whole body was indeed faintly aching, as if his bones were falling apart. He lifted his clothes to take a look, and didn't know how many bruises were left on his body, as if he had been beaten up in his sleep by someone. He moved slightly, and immediately screamed like a pig being slaughtered. Don't scream so pitifully. Shea sighed. I already applied medicine for you. Oh, right, I didn't hit you, I didn't do anything. Todoro's face twitched. That was because last night, a certain drunk guy spouted nonsense, and actually pissed in someone's wine jar, which angered everyone. Todoro's face was pale, and carefully thought back for a while. He vaguely remembered that such a thing had happened, but it didn't seem right. He hugged his head and thought hard for a while, and suddenly shouted, "Ah! That's not right. I remember pissing. But that jar of urine was handed to me by you." Shea spread out his hands. "You see," I said, "I didn't hit you, I was telling the truth." "Master, you are too shameless. Like before, I will take this sentence as a compliment." After saying this, Shea stood up, grabbed a clean leather robe and threw it on Todoro's head. "Get up and get dressed, we are going to find the magic kiss Taro today." Shea finished speaking and walked out of the tent, leaving Todoro sitting there alone. The poor magician recalled last night's matter for a while, and his heart was filled with regret, but suddenly his heart was moved. He remembered that last night, he was dancing with a few Zaku girls, and when he was in high spirits, he seemed to have kissed 2 of them. That feeling, it was very good. The magician had never experienced that feeling, but in retrospect, it seemed to be a feeling that he enjoyed very much. And it wasn't bad. Thinking about it, he could not help but be dazed for a while, and when he came back to his senses, he accidentally found that there seemed to be 2 thin pinch marks on his arm, as if they were made by fingernails. It seemed to be done by a woman? The taste of a woman? The magician's heart surged with an indescribable feeling that he had never experienced before, but then he shook his head hard, trying to push the feeling out of his head, but the more he wanted to forget, the more he found that his heart was in a mess. When Todoro lifted the tent curtain and walked out, Shea was already holding an axe and grinding it on the stone. And next to Shea, a young Zaku youth was holding a bow with both hands, trying to tighten the bow, and then gently testing the tightness of the bowstring. This youth was naturally Akai. Seeing Todoro come out, Akai took out something wrapped in leaves from his waist and threw it to the magician, who was suffering from a hangover, and smiled, revealing a mouth of white teeth. "This is a hangover medicine, put it under your tongue, it will feel better." The magician tore open the leaves, smelled a licorice-like aroma, and threw it into his mouth, which had a somewhat sour taste. But suddenly he was refreshed, and a sweet and sour liquid melted in his mouth and flowed down his throat, and his whole body relaxed. "It's getting late, we'd better set off before noon." Akai carried the adjusted bow on his back, and bent down to tighten the leggings on his legs, and looked up at Shea. "The thing you're looking for shouldn't be too difficult, it's in the forest behind. If we're lucky, we can be back by this time tomorrow." The chieftain was a man of his word, and as one of the few people in the tribe who could speak the Byzantium language, Akai was sent to act as a guide for the 2 men. Shea was very satisfied with this arrangement, because he knew that Akai was Ozwa's nephew, and he had a good impression of this Zaku youth. "The forest behind us is our territory, so we won't encounter any unexpected danger. Our tribe's hunters hunt in this forest every year, so there are no dangerous magical beasts here. Even if there are, they have long migrated elsewhere. This is the place where we graze our mounts, so I'm very familiar with it, so don't be nervous. The only dangerous place is that after passing through the grazing forest, there's a small river, which leads to a wild forest. Maybe we'll encounter some magical beasts, but in this season, the magical beasts are in the south and won't run north, so as long as we're careful, there won't be too much of a problem. It's just that the thing you want is not often seen in the forest. I've only heard of one place that has it. I've never been there, but it shouldn't be too difficult to find." Akai gestured as he finished speaking in stiff Byzantium language, and finally said very seriously, Also, I want to warn you, when you enter the forest, you must listen to me. You're outsiders, and the forest here is different from your world. Do you understand? Shea inserted a dagger into his boot and stood up. All right, let's go. Going out from the north of the Zaku tribe's stronghold was the forest. But according to Akai's introduction, the forest here was a mature forest. The Zaku people were used to dividing the forest in the mountains into mature forest and wild forest. The mature forest was the territory of the Zaku people. They hunted here and were familiar with everything here. At the same time, they would raise their mounts in this forest. Of course, in the eyes of outsiders, there was no difference between these forests. But as soon as he walked into the forest, Shea clearly felt the difference. The three people were all walking, with Akai walking in front. As soon as the Zaku youth entered the forest, the honest look on his body disappeared. His eyes were full of confidence. He walked easily all the way. When he walked past some thick trees, he would affectionately pat the trunks, and even hug the trunk. The trees here were very, very thick. Some even looked like big houses. The tall treetops were like huge umbrellas, with countless branches branching out and some hanging down to the ground. The vines were dense and curved. These trees were just trunks. Even 6 or 7 people would not be able to wrap their arms around them. As Akai walked, he seemed to be an old friend of these trees. He whistled and greeted them cheerfully along the way. Is he crazy? Talking to trees? Todoro blinked his eyes at the back. Shea did not say anything. After all, he was also born in the mountains. He had a faint feeling of resonance with Akai in his heart. After walking for a while, Akai looked back at Todoro and said, "Maybe you outsiders find it strange, but for us, the Zaku people, we believe that these trees are also alive. They have feelings and wisdom. Of course, our legends say that only trees over 100 years old can become real life. So we think that these old trees are our friends." This was not the strangest thing. The strangest thing was that the Zaku people actually gave names to the trees over 100 years old in this forest. Asik Murin, Dasido, how are you? Seeing Akai hug every tree as he walked, Todoro looked at this young Zaku with a strange expression. When he reached the side of an old tree that needed at least 10 people to carry, Akai stopped. He walked over and hugged the trunk with both arms. He gently stroked it and whispered, "This is my friend Doman. Doman is his name. He is my best friend in this forest. He saved my life." Shea did not make fun of him. He looked at Akai and said, "Oh? What kind of story is that?" Akai thought for a moment. "We, the Zaku people, have been walking in the forest since we were young. When I was 9 years old, I often came here and liked to play under Doman's tree. One day, I met a leopard here. At that time, I thought I was going to die. But Doman saved me. The leopard was entangled by Doman's tree vines. That was how I was able to escape." "Maybe that was just an accident," Todoro muttered. Shea suddenly frowned and whispered, "Shut up, Todoro." The country bumpkin, on the other hand, walked up with a serious expression. He looked at Akai and then at the old tree with its mottled bark and thick branches. He walked up with a serious expression and patted the tree trunk lightly. This action made Akai look at Shea with a much softer gaze. The young Zaku happily smiled. "You are a good guy. Doman will like you." Shea smiled and turned to Todoro. His expression was very serious. "You may not understand, but only those who grew up in the mountains can understand this kind of feeling. And even if you don't believe it, you must at least learn to respect other people's culture. Remember that." On the surface, the Archmage nodded, but he still muttered under his breath, "It's just a broken tree. What's the big deal?" He suddenly screamed and fell to the ground. His face was buried in the mud. Poor Todoro struggled to get up. He didn't know when, but when he got up, he found that there was a tree vine under his feet. The tree vine came from the tree called Doman and tripped him. The tree vine might have been here for a long time, but Shea looked at Todoro and said, "See, I reminded you. Be polite." Todoro was about to curse, but when he looked at the tree vine under his feet, he couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. He swallowed the curse that was about to come out of his mouth. The three of them didn't walk fast in the forest, but as Kai said, it was very safe here. The Zaku people were familiar with the forest. They walked until the sun went down and then stopped. "We'll be out of this forest tomorrow," Kai said. "Unfortunately, there's nothing here that you want. But maybe we'll find something tomorrow." In the woods, Kai didn't make a fire. Instead, she walked around a few big trees nearby. She hugged a big tree and muttered something for a while. Then, she climbed up the big tree and tore off 2 vines after a while. He dragged the long vines down to the ground, then pulled them in front of Shea. He took out a dagger and gently cut a hole in the vines. A milky white liquid immediately came out. He grabbed one of the vines and sucked on it twice. Then he motioned to Shea, and Shea did the same. The milky white liquid in the vines was a little astringent, but once one got used to the astringent taste, there would naturally be a sweet fragrance. It tasted a little like milk, but it didn't have the fishy smell of milk. Kai left half a bowl of the liquid in the opening of the vine. Then, she carefully put the vine back. She even pulled out a few stalks of grass from the ground and crushed them. Then, she used the grass juice to paste on the opening. "These trees are our friends. We can borrow something from them, but we can't be greedy." Kai said this with a sincere expression. Although Todoro still didn't believe in the saying that trees have life, it was undeniable that the juice in the vines was indeed delicious. So the archmage simply shut his mouth. After resting for a while, a rustling sound suddenly came from the forest. Kai's ears immediately stood up. He carried the short spear and jumped on the tree trunk, looking around vigilantly. Soon, a shadow slowly walked out from the thicket behind. It was a tall and well-proportioned Sika deer. The deer's neck was majestic, its limbs were slender, and its body was covered in beautiful patterns. And on the back of this deer, there was a Jaku girl riding on it. Her flaxen hair was tied into several small braids. She had dark brown eyes and a delicate face. She wore an extremely delicate leather robe and a short leather skirt, revealing a pair of slender and strong legs. Her skin was healthy and full of vitality. Her eyes were black and sparkling under her eyelashes. A small hunting bow hung on her back. The young girl rode the deer out of the thicket. Her slender neck was full of slender beauty, and her pair of long legs were full of youthful vitality. Looking at her, she was like an elf that had walked out of the forest. But when Kai saw the young girl on the deer's back, he suddenly froze. Su Ling? Su Ling jumped off the deer and looked at Kai. She humphed but didn't say anything. Then she turned to look at the stunned Shea in the distance. The young girl cheerfully called out. Her lithe body was like a swallow as she quickly ran over to Shea. Standing in front of him, Su Ling put one hand on her waist and pointed at Shea's nose. "Hey, do you think I'll give up? You're the person I, Su Ling, like. I'll follow you." Shea was stunned for a moment. He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, Kai had already run over. He frowned and shouted, "Su Ling, how could you come here? The great tribal chief won't allow you to leave the forest. You shouldn't be here and—" "Humph, I got father's permission." Su Ling happily raised her hand and proudly raised her wrist. There was a small golden bell on her wrist that gently swayed and tinkled. When Kai saw the bell, he immediately deflated. He looked at the beautiful girl with a complicated expression, then looked at Shea. He wanted to say something, but didn't. "This." Shea licked his lip. I remember I made it very clear last night. That what? Don't forget, this is our forest. You can come in, but I can't? Also, the great tribal chief has already agreed. I'll be one of the guides for this trip. I know that the daily update time is a bit late. I'll work hard to adjust and update earlier in the future. I'll first apologize to everyone. Then, please vote. Please recommend me. To be continued. If you want to know the future, please go to www.chidian.com. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 230. Please recommend me. GOR Chapter 216. Dead or not, Shea was feeling depressed. He looked at the girl and turned his head away, ignoring her. Su Ling, on the other hand, appeared very excited. She bounced back and forth, seemingly in high spirits. After a while, she pointed at Todoro and laughed happily. I heard that during the bonfire event last night there was a fellow who stripped naked and ran around. Are you that fellow? Todoro. Su Ling said, Why are you staring at me? Why is your face red? Wow, your eyes are wide open. You look like a frog. Frog? Todoro's body shuddered. The word frog was the word he dreaded the most. This Sakura girl continued to cause trouble for a while Akai observed her coldly from the side. After a while, Sakura was finally unable to hold back. He pulled Su Ling to the side and whispered, Just what are you doing here? Don't talk about being a guide. I don't believe the chieftain would send you here as a guide. Su Ling raised her chin and looked at Akai. If you don't believe me, you can go back and ask him. I have a token with me. There was a look of impatience on Akai's face. Don't cause trouble. Everyone knows that you can get lost walking in a mature forest. The great tribal chief wouldn't make such an absurd decision. You must have stolen his token, right? Who said I would get lost? Didn't I come here on my own and catch up to you? Su Ling's eyes darted around in a somewhat guilty manner. Akai did not believe her. But why didn't you come with us? If it was the chieftain's order, why didn't he tell me? It was a last-minute decision. Su Ling secretly glanced at Shea. However, she was disappointed. Shea did not even look at her. He simply crossed his arms and leaned against the tree with his eyes closed. Su Ling thought about it and said, I begged my father for a long time before he agreed to let me out. I was a little late. That's why I only managed to catch up to you now. Even if you beat me to death, I can't say that I got lost in the woods. Otherwise, that man will look down on me. As the daughter of the Zaku clan, he would think I was an idiot if I got lost in my own forest. The two young Zaku people argued in their native language, but Shea just turned over impatiently. Shea felt helpless in his heart, and even more so, he was going crazy. F***ck, could it be that Lao Tzu's fate had fallen in love? Why were all the girls he met crying and begging to be his wife? Su Ling, this is not a joke. It might be fine here, but we'll be crossing the river tomorrow. That's the wild forest. It might be dangerous. Akai still shook her head. So, I'll send you back. If you... Are you looking down on me? No matter what, I'm still the chief's daughter. I'm also a Zaku, and I have Zaku blood in me. Su Ling was infuriated. To me, this forest is as familiar as my own tent. After saying that, as if to prove something, she jumped up and busied herself. Unfortunately, it seemed that Akai's evaluation of this spoiled girl was right. She was a Zaku girl who would get lost in her own forest. When Su Ling started a fire, she held the tongs for a long time, but didn't make a single spark. Instead, she smeared grass ash all over her face. Luckily, Todoro couldn't stand it anymore, and the kind-hearted magician quietly started a fire for her. Su Ling then ran to the side to look for food. She took a knife and tried to climb a tree to cut the vines, but fell down halfway. Looking at her tragic appearance, even Shea felt somewhat distressed. Such a delicate girl had directly fallen from the tree. The pitiful Su Ling rubbed her delicate buttocks and cried out a few times. Then, she realized that she couldn't show weakness like this. She endured the pain and stood up. Looking at the towering tree, she was in a daze for a while. She really wasn't good at climbing trees. However, this didn't affect Su Ling. She began to look for other food. After looking around, Su Ling found a dozen or so brightly colored mushrooms under some rotting tree trunks. The color of the mushrooms was enticing, and the meat was plump. They looked delicious. Su Ling laughed and picked up a bunch of mushrooms. She skewered them with a stick and was about to roast them when Kai ran over and knocked the stick of mushrooms out of her hand. She threw the stick into the fire. Su Ling was furious. Kai, what are you doing? Kai looked at Su Ling coldly. I'm saving your life. In the tribe, even a 5-year-old child can tell that this is poisonous. Su Ling's face turned red, and her head almost fell to her chest. Kai still wanted to say something, but in the end Shea couldn't stand it anymore. He stood up, sighed, and walked over. He picked up the remaining dried food from the evening and handed it to Su Ling. Okay, she is still a child. Eat your fill first. Su Ling was overjoyed. Her sparkling eyes stared at Shea for a while, causing Shea's hair to stand on end. Only then did she cheer and sit down while holding the rations. She glared at Kai as if she was demonstrating. The food was just a hard flatbread with a small piece of jerky inside. It wasn't delicious, but because it was given to her by that man, Su Ling was very happy. She ate it with relish. She took big bites. She felt that all the food she had eaten in her life, such as tender deer liver, sparrow tongue, and sweet purple berries, couldn't compare to this flatbread in her hand. It was just that the bread was too dry and hard, causing the girl to stretch her neck out. Duo Luo kindly handed her a bag of water. Su Ling took it and drank 2 mouthfuls. Thank you, Mr. Streaker. Todoro, I should have let her choke to death, the Archmage thought viciously. However, Todoro had a strange feeling in his heart. He couldn't help but sneak glances at Zaku. Even he himself felt that this action was a little strange. In the Archmage's eyes, this Zaku was delicate and cute. Her face was delicate, her flaxen braids swayed gently, her slender neck was as graceful as a swan's, and her slender and well-proportioned limbs, especially the long legs that stretched out from under her leather skirt. They were full of elasticity and vitality. The Archmage's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. This girl looked so young and beautiful, but she had the general well-developed characteristics of a Zaku girl. The places that should be big were bigger than other girls, and the places that should be thin were slimmer than other girls. Todoro felt that there was something wrong with him. It wasn't that he hadn't seen beautiful girls before, but he had never thought that the creatures called girls were so beautiful. In the past, when he faced girls, it didn't matter if they were beautiful or ugly. In the Archmage's eyes, there was no difference. But, after last night's hangover, it seemed that the Archmage suddenly felt that women were really very attractive, although this girl always said things like streaking, which made Todoro very unhappy. He still couldn't control his eyes and kept glancing at Su Ling. In fact, several men looked at this girl with different thoughts. Unlike the complicated look in Todoro's eyes, Shea and Kai's faces were full of helplessness. Su Ling seemed to be unaware of it. After happily eating her fill, she was already tired after a day of walking in the woods. After leading her Sika deer, she lay down next to Shea. The Sika deer knelt down, and this Zaku girl hugged the deer's head and lay down next to it. Her body was next to her deer. After yawning twice, she closed her eyes and fell asleep. She looked like a tired kitten. Kai and Shea looked at each other. Both of them had the same meaning: we're in trouble. Far away in the south, Osgilla was experiencing a storm at this moment. Or more accurately, this was just a preview of the real storm before it came. Although it was evening, the originally lively streets were now deserted. Even in the usually bustling south of the city, there was not a single shop on the road that was still open. There were no pedestrians on the road, and no carriages passing by. Even those places that were normally lit up day and night were all closed for the night. Teams of neatly armored soldiers were patrolling back and forth on the streets with murderous intent. From time to time, there was a team of horses galloping quickly by the street. In the night, a few shouts could occasionally be heard. In the distance, there seemed to be the sound of a door being broken. Then, soldiers rushed into someone's house, followed by a series of cries and shouts. A city-wide search. This was a real city-wide manhunt. Because of the sudden assassination of the wise man who had shocked the empire for decades, the emperor's most trusted confidant, the revered Lord Cavalier, triggered the Qigong emperor's monstrous anger. In the past few days, large numbers of city guards had almost turned the whole of Osgilla into a big prison. The emperor gave a strict order and vowed to find the murderer of his close confidant. At least 5,000 soldiers were scattered throughout the whole of Osgilla. They searched almost every street and every house. The formerly bustling city of Osgilla was completely under martial law. The city gates were closed, and even the docks and ports had been sealed off. In the past few days, it was said that the docks near the docks were filled with ships waiting to enter. The warehouses at the docks were full of goods waiting to be shipped. There were also some fresh fish and vegetables piled up like mountains. Some of them had already rotted away, causing the entire docks to be filled with a foul stench. In the city-wide manhunt, it was said that more than 100 suspects had been caught. Towards these suspects, under the emperor's fury, the Qigong emperor did not even have the intention to interrogate them. He directly ordered them to be executed. Such a ruthless order made everyone tremble in fear. But everyone was very clear that the real culprit had not been caught. The emperor was very clear, and his subordinates were also very clear that those arrested were just suspicious people. But at this moment, the emperor's fury needed to be vented. So, these people were turned into bloody heads one by one, from the south to the west and then to the east. Even the aristocratic residential area in the north was not spared. The city guards were like wolves and tigers, holding search warrants personally signed by the emperor. Even in the middle of the night, they would openly knock on the doors of the aristocrats and high officials. Cold and polite words, with bright torches and sharp weapons in the hands of the soldiers. Under these circumstances, no one dared to refuse this search. One by one, the suspects were dragged to the street. Without any trial, the soldiers lined them up and made them kneel there. Then, the butcher's knife fell. Among the search teams there were also the imperial army. But what made many people in the city sensitive was that the search area was getting bigger and bigger. Gradually, it was approaching the most sensitive area in Osgilla City, the Red Zone. As the territory of the Round Table Conference's chief leader, the Red Zone was the flag territory of the Empire's warlords. In the imperial capital, it had always been on par with the imperial palace. But this time, the soldiers had already searched through the surrounding streets of the Red Zone and sealed off all the surrounding areas. Even the carriages that were transporting food in and out of the Red Zone were detained for repeated inspection. This action immediately caused a strong dissatisfaction in the military. The chairman of the Round Table Conference, the Empire's Minister of Military Affairs, Salvador, had not been to the Eagle's Nest for many days. In reality, the military was already in a state of paralysis. Most of the military officers were gathered in the Red Zone and did not go out. What made Salvador more and more uneasy was that the signs were already very obvious. This Qigong emperor, that old emperor, wanted to do something big. What was he planning? A coup? Humph! A coup! This answer was in the hearts of everyone in the Red Zone, but no one said it out loud. Everyone still had a glimmer of hope in their hearts. This old emperor wouldn't go crazy, right? Because if he really did go all out, then with the power of the imperial family would be at an absolute disadvantage against the empire's warlords. Unless Qigong emperor really wanted the empire to be destroyed. What made Salvador even more anxious was that the entire city had been sealed off. The docks and ports had been sealed off. In the past few days of search, the so-called suspects who were killed were all well known to everyone. Many of them were actually secret spies sent by the various military governors in the imperial capital. Many of the places that had been destroyed were the secret intelligence gathering points of the various warlords in the imperial capital. The old emperor was obviously going crazy. Although the entire city was sealed off, Salvador was not worried that the news would not be able to get out, because it was completely meaningless. Even if the emperor killed all the warlords in the imperial capital, what was the point? The true power of the warlords was in the various military districts in the empire. Killing all the warlord representatives in the imperial capital would not weaken the warlords' power at all. It would only lead to a raging rebellion. Sealed off information? So what if it was sealed off? However, the only thing that Salvador was worried about was his own life. As the representative of the warlord's henchmen in the capital, the first thing the emperor would do would be to capture him and chop his head off as a sacrifice if he fell out with the emperor. Salvador had already thought of many ways to secretly escape the imperial capital. As long as he returned to his military district, even if there was a real rebellion, he would be able to deal with it calmly. Other than that, Salvador was even more confused. Was Cavalier, that old bastard, dead or not? Requesting recommendation votes. I really need recommendation votes? To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please go to www.chidian.com. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 231. Please recommend me. Chapter 217. Teacher? As the chairman of the Round Table Conference, Salvatore knew better than anyone else that Cavalier's assassination had nothing to do with him. The moment this incident broke out, Salvatore had suspected. This is a trick played by that damned Cavalier to fake his death, shifting the blame to our warlord party? So that he would have an excuse to take action? But if that is the case, that would be too childish. Who would believe that that old bastard Cavalier is really dead? That fellow must be hiding somewhere in the dark right now, laughing sinisterly as he secretly planned all of this. Damn it! The moment he thought of Cavalier, Salvatore's entire body turned cold. This is definitely not a childish coup. There is a conspiracy behind this. Given Cavalier's intelligence, he would never launch such a childish coup. Because Salvatore knew better than anyone else that if the emperor were to launch a coup, then what awaits him would be the complete destruction of the Byzantine Empire's imperial family. He cannot win. He cannot win. The only result would be to massacre all the warlord party representatives in the imperial capital to vent his anger. However, in at most half a year, the various rebellions would completely bury the empire. Cavalier must not be dead. Salvatore gritted his teeth and looked at the dark sky. He must be hiding. This fellow, what is he planning? Bastard! 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 In the imperial capital, the emperor of the empire was also roaring. His roar was so loud that it almost caused the entire hall to collapse. You are all a bunch of idiots. A bunch of trash. A bunch of complete idiots. The Qigong Emperor's face was contorted and his face turned red to purple. His rage had reached a critical point. Before him were several armored generals. The one kneeling on the far left was the commander of the Imperial Guards, General Span. He was also the uncle of the 4 talents of the imperial city that Shea had met before, the giant Nigel. General Span's face was pale and soybean-sized beads of sweat flowed down his cheeks to the ground. However, he remained kneeling on one knee, not daring to utter a single word. At this moment, what General Span was most worried about wasn't the Emperor's anger. Instead, it was, where would this matter end up? As the commander of the Imperial Guards, General Span knew very well that having the Imperial Guards lock down the entire city and the Red Zone was a dangerous signal to the warlord party. He had expressed his opposition to it, but the Emperor's fierce gaze back then had caused General Span to shut his mouth. He knew very well that if he dared to object again, he would be executed on the spot by the Emperor's palace guards. Then, someone else would take his place. This was an act of madness. Utter madness. And it was suicidal. All of you are trash. Idiots. The old emperor's face was filled with grief and frustration. The bastards who killed Cavashir had weapons. Bastards. Crossbows. To be able to use crossbows to kill people on the street. Are there many people with this kind of ability? Osgilla was only this big. Those bastards had crossbows. Such an obvious sign, can't you find it? Span's body trembled and his head hung even lower. And you, Junker, you piece of trash. Emperor Cantos glared at the second person kneeling in front of him. It was the leader of the Dark Knight Imperial Guards, Junker. Emperor Cantos's voice was cold. I warned you. Before we begin our preparations, your biggest task is to protect Cavashir. I need him. The Empire needs him. We need him alive. Now he is dead. How are we going to proceed with our plan? Junker's face was cold as he raised his head. Your Majesty, I am willing to apologize with my life. Absolute bastard. Emperor Cantos suddenly walked over and viciously kicked Junker's shoulder. Junker was kicked to the ground and crawled up, but his face was still filled with respect. There was no dissatisfaction in his eyes, only guilt. So what if you die? 100 Junkers is not worth 1 Cavashir. Even if you die 100 times, it will not make up for it. Bastard. I need you alive. Get to work. Get to work. If you say such things again, find a place with no one around and die. Don't do it in front of me. Yes. Junker gritted his teeth and raised his head. Junker is willing to die for your Majesty. The old emperor gritted his teeth and his body trembled a few times before slowly backing away. Step by step, he fell heavily into his chair, his chest heaving violently. After a long time, Emperor Cantos's eyes finally flashed with determination. Give the order, enter the red zone. Arrest the suspects. Those words seemed to have been squeezed out from the gaps between his teeth, each word carrying with it a sense of determination. Hearing those words, General Span's face changed greatly. Could it be, it really has to come to this? He knows very well that things have not reached the worst point yet, but once the troops are sent into the red zone, that will be the final signal. A declaration of war. What's next? What will happen next? Osgilla will create a river of blood and kill all the warlords in the military? Then what happens after that? The warlords will start a rebellion all over the Empire, the flames of war will fill the sky, the Empire will collapse. Your Majesty. Span felt that his voice was a little hoarse. He raised his head, but he immediately met Emperor Cantos' gaze. What kind of gaze is that? Madness, stubbornness, tenacity, and unshakable determination. Seeing that gaze, Span understood that no matter what he says, it will be useless. He believed without a doubt that if he dares to raise any objections, His Majesty will immediately give the order to have him executed. Your Majesty, I accept your orders. General Span stood up and looked at the old emperor before bowing deeply. I pledge my loyalty to the Empire and your Majesty. Emperor Cantos looked at Span and took a deep breath. I will remember your loyalty. The Empire will also remember your loyalty. General Span didn't say anything else. He took a deep breath, tightened the cloak on his armor, and turned to leave. He knew very well that he had no other choice. Perhaps he was a coward, perhaps he had compromised, but at this moment, he had no other choice. As a soldier of the Empire, as an officer of the Eagle Division, the Emperor trusted him and allowed him to lead the Imperial Capital's army. Thus, in the end, he can only choose to be loyal to the end, even if he knows that he will die. Your Majesty, do you need me to keep an eye on him? After Span walked out, Junker looked at the door and said, General Span does not seem to be determined. I can keep an eye on him. If he wavers, we should execute him immediately. No need, I believe in his loyalty. Cantos's face was cold. Junker, do your job well. I do not want you to disappoint me again. The old emperor sat there, gently gasping, giving that order seemed to have drained him of all his strength. You should know what we are about to face. Emperor Cantos grinned. Your eyes, I need your eyes. Keep an eye on Salvador. That fellow will definitely think of a way to escape. I want to see his head placed on my table. Junker silently stood up and bowed. Then, he turned and walked out. When Junker reached the door, Emperor Cantos suddenly spoke up. Junker, I also believe in your loyalty. This I have never doubted. When only the Emperor was left in the hall. Oh, of course, there was also the man in the corner who always followed the Emperor like a shadow. Who the hell killed Cavashir? The pain in the old Emperor's eyes was indescribable. He clenched his hands so tightly that his nails dug deep into his flesh. No matter who it is, I must avenge Cavashir. Avenge! Daphne, maybe, you don't have to. Looking at the figure standing in front of the window, Adeline called out and then shut her mouth. Daphne, the daughter of the Duke of Minas and the Crown Princess of the Crown Prince, turned to look at Adeline. She looked thin and haggard. Her chin was a little sharp, but her charming eyes were even more seductive. Even the equally beautiful Adeline could not help but feel a sense of inferiority when she stood in front of her sister-in-law. You don't have to comfort me. Daphne smiled and said softly, Adeline, I think you and I both know what His Majesty is thinking. Adeline gritted her teeth. I was never the crown princess. I never was. Daphne said softly. My husband has never treated me as his wife, and His Majesty has never really treated me as his daughter-in-law. I am just a flag, a decoration. Adeline, you know His Majesty better than I do. You know his coldness. Adeline bit her lip. Maybe we can. Daphne came over and gently hugged Adeline, whispering, Let's go, leave this place, leave the capital, run as far as possible. The people of the Croenma family are all crazy, all of them. But you are different, Adeline, you are a clear-headed person, so if you have the chance, run. The fire that His Majesty started, I am afraid, will burn the Croenma family to ashes. His Majesty no longer trusts my father. Daphne smiled and said, Look at what happened this time, mutiny, coup, but His Majesty did not express his trust in my father. Perhaps the Minas family is also on his list of enemies. Garcia left the capital, but he did not bring me with him. That is the first sign. And now, all of Osgilla is in the midst of a storm, but my father is still sitting in the castle, waiting for the Emperor's summons. I suspect His Majesty no longer trusts my father. I don't understand. The Duke of Minas should be his most trusted pillar of support. Daphne hesitated for a moment before whispering, I have heard of a legend. It seems that a few decades ago, something happened between His Majesty, my father and Cavashir. At that time, it seems that my father made a wrong decision. In fact, that decision was made by His Majesty, but later on, it was proven wrong. However, His Majesty probably blamed that failure on my father, so the Minas family is no longer on his list of trusted candidates. The beautiful and gentle crown princess kissed Adeline's forehead. Leave this place, Adeline, before this fire completely burns out. Leave this place. I'm worried that everyone who stays in the imperial capital will be destroyed together with them. After a pause, Daphne whispered, The gate officer at the west gate used to be my guard. I have already made the arrangements. Tomorrow morning, you can leave from the west gate, so, what about you? Adeline's eyes widened as she cried out in horror, You can come with me. I am the crown princess, the daughter of the Minas family. Daphne smiled faintly. I am a person who has already been labeled. After a pause, Daphne said softly, Didn't you tell me that you like that guy called Shea Thunder very much? He is the governor in the north. You can go find him, and then forget your name, forget your surname, listen to me, and live well in the future. When Shea woke up early in the morning, he regretted keeping this girl called Su Ling. After a night's rest and recovering her strength, Su Ling was like a sparrow chirping non-stop beside him, so noisy that the country bumpkin had a headache. Do you like gardenias? I like this flower the most, I like its smell. And I like to ride horses, although I rarely ride horses, but I heard from those outsiders that it is very enjoyable to ride horses on the grasslands, but I have never seen grasslands in my life. And the sea, have you seen the sea? Have you been on a big ship? I heard that those big ships can hold thousands of people, and are as high as a 4 or 5-story house. The sails can cover the sky when they open up. I heard that there are seagulls on the sea. Those birds are calling all day long. Do you know what they call? Is it ah or ah? Shea was about to break down. He only knew that he really wanted to find a rope and tie this girl's neck up. Hey, are you usually so talkative? Shea stared at Su Ling maliciously. Wow, you've finally answered me. Su Ling cheered, her voice as clear as a bell. I like it. I like learning Byzantium. Teacher said that if you want to learn a language, you have to speak as much as possible. Unfortunately, there are too few people in the tribe who can speak your language, so I can only speak as much as possible. And Father too, Father's Byzantium is even better than mine. I heard teacher say that it is a standard language of nobility. It's really strange. Are there many different kinds of Byzantium? Teacher said that this difference is called, right, accent. It's called accent, right? Shea really wanted to find the teacher who taught her Byzantium and choke that bastard to death. So he said with a gloomy face, Oh? What kind of person is the teacher who taught you Byzantium? Teacher is a very powerful person, Su Ling said with a smile. He is very beautiful, very handsome, and the most important thing is that he doesn't look like he will age. He will only come here once every few years, and he will stay for half a year each time. But he will never wait until summer. He will leave before summer. Father and I speak Byzantium. It was teacher who taught us. He is Father's honorary priest. He also knows a lot of things. He taught me how to make animals out of leaves and put them in the sky. He said that kind of thing is called a kite. Also, he told me that this world is very, very big. Outside the mountains there is a continent. That is your world, but outside there is the sea, and there are other countries on the sea. There is the Lantis kingdom. The people there are good at archery. That's right. Have you seen the Lantis people? Are they very good at archery? Are they better than our Jaku people? Shea said with a gloomy face. If there is a chance, I really want to see that teacher. That's right, this country bumpkin wants to break that guy's neck. There will definitely be a chance, Su Ling said with a smile. Teacher hasn't come here for a long time. It shouldn't be too long before he comes again. Su Ling happily said, Teacher has a head of golden hair. Golden hair is very beautiful, right? But I don't like it at all. But teacher said that people outside all like golden hair. Yes, teacher is very tall, about the same height as you, but he is the same as you. He doesn't like to talk much. Speaking up to here, Su Ling suddenly thought of something and smiled. Right, he also has a very strange name. His name is Darwin. Shea suddenly froze, his eyes opened wide. Wait, what did you say his name was? Darwin, yes, that's how it is pronounced. Su Ling slowly said, This name is very strange, right? Actually, I feel that you people outside all have very strange names. Your names are very complicated. Later on, Su Ling chattered on about something, but Shea didn't listen. Darwin? Darwin. Golden hair, male, very good looking, doesn't like to talk, his name is Darwin? Shea was stunned. Among the people he knew, there seemed to be someone who met these conditions. Coincidentally, there seemed to be such a person among them. Darwin? Humph. In his mind, Dora's heavy snort sounded. Looking for recommendation votes. Need recommendation votes. Firepower support. To be continued. If you want to know the future, please go to www.chidian.com. Calm, there are more chapters. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 232. GOR Chapter 218. Leaving the city at night. Although there was a canal between them, the murderous aura was enough to make people breathless. On the other side of the canal in the red zone, the city guards nervously guarded the bridge. Horses were piled up at the end of the bridge, and the city guards from the imperial capital looked at each other across the river. Both sides appeared to be waiting for something. Everyone knew that once the order was given, an unavoidable battle would ensue. The night air was filled with an eerie smell. The cold metal was so cold that one could smell it with their noses. At the two ends of the canal, there were at least 2,000 soldiers gathered there. At that moment, however, all of them were silent and not a single sound could be heard. In contrast, the city guards in the red zone were even more nervous. The city guards on the other side of the canal were still mobilizing. In the darkness of the night, the faint sound of running soldiers and horse hooves could be heard from afar. More and more city guards were rushing over. On the other side of the canal, many of the buildings had been occupied by the city guard. In the darkness of the night, the archers could be faintly seen. At that moment, the air seemed to have frozen. The hazy moonlight shone down upon the city. The moonlight reflected off the surface of the water, and the shields in the hands of the city guards gave off a chilling light. At that moment, the only sound that could be heard was the creaking sound of bowstrings being pulled taut for too long. Finally, from the other side of the bridge in the red zone, a low shout could be heard. Next, the city guards moved the horses off the bridge. The wheels rolled and two carriages slowly moved out. The wheels of the carriages made creaking sounds as though the axles had not been oiled for a long time and were on the verge of rusting. Along the way, the sound of the carriages sounded like that of an old man. The horses pulling the carriages were covered in mud and their hooves were heavy. In the midst of the tense atmosphere, the two carriages slowly made their way to the other side of the canal. At least 20 crossbows were aimed at them before the city guards stopped them. Several city guards stepped forward to check the carriages before breathing a sigh of relief. "It's a water carriage for water delivery." One of the soldiers inspected the large water buckets on the carriage before jumping down. He exchanged glances with the officer and said, 4 hours ago, these two carriages had entered to deliver water. We have searched them. The leading officer hesitated. Under the strict orders from above, the red zone had been surrounded for several days. However, as the final order had not been issued, the city guard army had only sealed off the area. Every day, they still allowed the vehicles that carried grain, vegetables, and drinking water to enter and leave. However, they were all strictly inspected. Even the firewood that was delivered would be fiercely poked by the soldiers with spears. The soldiers on the carriages had already turned over every bucket. They were empty except for the layers of rust on the iron walls of the bucket. The officer hesitated for a moment before nodding. Let them pass. After all, the higher-ups hadn't given the final order to attack yet. Even many of the city guards were hesitating. Perhaps, at the last moment, His Majesty would change his mind. Everyone knew that the red zone was the bottom line. Once this bottom line was crossed, it would be the final declaration of war and rupture. Let them pass. The soldiers shouted anxiously. Soon after, the formation of the city guards parted, creating a path in the thick shield wall, allowing the broken old carriage to slowly pass through. The leading officer watched as the car slowly passed by. Suddenly, he felt that something was wrong. He grabbed the subordinate beside him and said, "Bring me today's records." He quickly flipped through the records of today's entries and exits on the bridge. "How many times have there been today?" 6 times. The soldier replied. 3 times were for food, 1 time for firewood and coal, and 2 times for water. There were a total of 33 carriages that entered and exited. I've checked. The number of carriages that sent things in is the same as the number of carriages that exited. The carriages have also been checked. There are no hidden or suspicious things. The officer breathed a sigh of relief. He smiled bitterly and shook his head. It seemed that he had been too nervous. This damned situation was turning people into lunatics. When would such a blockade come to an end? Span led a group of cavalry around the intersection and galloped toward the canal. The commander of the city guard army's face was gloomy at the moment. The heavy feeling in his heart was almost suffocating him. Even if he urged his horse to gallop, it could not alleviate the oppressive feeling in his heart. The oppressive feeling in his chest was unbearable. It looked like it was going to rain today. The lapel of his breastplate was already soaked with sweat. Hidden in his breastplate was an order personally written by Emperor Cantos. At this moment, General Span suddenly felt a sense of historical mission. He knew very well that the order he was carrying out might. No, it was not just might, it was about to happen. It was about to change the fate of the Empire. The one who rings the knell. Span rode on his horse and suddenly felt a sense of tragedy. 100 years later, when the future generations record the history, will they leave my name? Span will personally ring the knell of this millennium-old empire? Thinking of this, the general's mood was a little gloomy. But then he bit the tip of his tongue hard and kicked the horse's belly hard, forcing himself to pull himself together. After all, he was a soldier. He had to carry out his orders. Span's cavalry turned the corner. At the end of the street was the canal bridge. In front of them, they saw the two empty water carts slowly approaching. The two sides met at the intersection. The distance between them was less than 10 steps. The two water carts turned around and slowly headed in the other direction of the intersection. Span subconsciously slowed down the speed of his horse. It was probably the sound of the rusty wheels that broke his train of thought. The general naturally raised his head to look at the two water carts. The cavalrymen behind him all stopped. On the street, there was only the sound of the wheels and the horses pulling the carts. They trampled on the bluestone paved road, making a heavy duh-duh sound. Suddenly, Span felt a little envious of the two water carts, because at this time, they were lucky enough to leave the place where the fire was about to ignite. The sound of horse hooves came from afar, combining with the sound of the heavy wheels. Span was a little lost in thought. A faint trace of strangeness flashed through his heart. He frowned and then shook his head. Only then did he rein in his horse and slowly walk towards the canal. Span came to the canal. After he got off his horse, he immediately summoned the officer here. After listening to the officer's report, Span nodded. Everything seemed to be normal. There were no unusual movements in the red zone. The guards there were only tightly guarding the banks of the canal. This was also a situation they had expected. Perhaps, no matter if it was them or me. None of us thought that His Majesty would go crazy to this extent. Span was very clear that although there were 1,000 elite guards in the red zone, and according to the information he had in the past, these 1,000 guards were far more elite than his own city guard. No matter if it was their weapons, armor, equipment, or individual strength, they were still trapped in the red zone. However, they were still trapped in an area. In the imperial capital, his city guard army had the absolute advantage in terms of military strength. No matter how powerful the other side's 1,000 elites were, they could still fill the gap with manpower. If it was just to capture the red zone, then this mission didn't seem to be too difficult. But standing on the bridge and looking at the red zone on the other side, why did the feeling of oppression and unease in his heart become stronger and stronger? Was it fear? Was he afraid that after capturing the red zone, the Empire would collapse and the chaos of the end of the world? It didn't seem like it. Humph, no matter what, let's capture this place first. Even if the Empire was going to be destroyed in the end, we must first cut off the heads of those warlords in Salvador. Even if the general was going to die, his sword must be stained with the blood of those enemies to not be wasted. Span slowly pulled out his sword and shouted in a low voice, "Line up!" Hearing this order, the officer under him was stunned for a moment. He stared at General Span with wide eyes. "Sir, could it be?" Span looked at his subordinates with a complicated expression. "Execute the order. Line up." Seeing his subordinates silently execute the order, looking at the fully armed soldiers beside him, the forest of spears, the wall of shields, all of them shining with a cold light under the moonlight, Span's mouth felt bitter. At this time, if only he could leave, how good would it be? Leave. Span took 2 steps forward and raised his sword. Just as he was about to say a few words of encouragement, the thought in his mind suddenly expanded infinitely. Faintly, the scene that he saw on the road earlier entered his mind and became deeper and deeper. In an instant, Span's face abruptly changed. Along the way, his heart had been filled with a strange and uneasy feeling. When they passed by the last street, that feeling of unease increased by several folds. He had originally thought that he was too nervous, but at this moment, he realized that was not the case. That was the sound of horse hooves. The sound of horse hooves pulling the water wheel. In the darkness of the night, on the long street, the sound of horse hooves mixed together with the rolling wheels. In a split second, General Span realized where his uneasiness came from. The sound of horse hooves was definitely not something that an ordinary horse pulling a water wheel should have. The powerful and short sound of horse hooves meant that the horse was majestic and full of strength. As for the sound of horse hooves hitting the ground, only the thick iron hooves of the horse could make such a sound. Furthermore, Span was an experienced veteran soldier. He was very clear about this. Only the newly nailed horseshoes of good quality would produce such a crisp sound. The horses used to pull the water wheel obviously did not need to be nailed with good quality horseshoes. Even in the cavalry forces, only the best horseshoes would be nailed to the horses before a large-scale cavalry battle to maintain the mobility of the horses during long-distance marches. Having understood this point, Span's face suddenly changed. He was originally standing at the front of the formation when he suddenly charged forward like a madman. Grabbing his subordinate, he shouted, "Where are the entry and exit records? Where are the entry and exit records?" The subordinate officer was stunned by Span's loss of self-control and stammered out a reply. Span immediately broke out in cold sweat. "Bastard! You bunch of idiots!" Span shouted. "Cavalry, get on your horses! Quick! Salvador is running away!" "General, General!" The subordinate was still in a daze. Span angrily lashed out with his whip and shouted, "What idiots! The horses pulling the water wheel are all top-quality war horses, nailed with the best horseshoes. They are already running away." Without waiting for his subordinate to react, Span had already rushed to the side of the cavalry formation. Mounting his horse, he shouted, "Cavalry, follow me! Catch up to those transport carriages! Quick!" However, at this moment, from the opposite side of the bridge, from the red zone, a loud and clear sound of a bugle horn suddenly rang out. In the darkness of the night, the defenders on the opposite side pushed out several prepared crossbow carts. The crossbow bolts were already covered in grease. After igniting the crossbow bolts with torches, the crossbow bolts whistled through the air and several fire arrows were fired towards the opposite side of the bridge. The powerful penetrative force of the crossbow bolts whistled through the air and instantly pierced through a house by the side of the bridge. With a boom, the roof of the house collapsed on the spot. Dust and debris flew out in all directions, causing the archers hiding on the roof to cry out in alarm. Numerous crossbow bolts were fired in unison, instantly knocking down a portion of the city guards who had already lined up on this side of the bridge. Over a dozen soldiers were directly pierced by the powerful crossbow bolts on the spot, and miserable cries rang out. In his fury, Span was grabbed by the subordinate beside him and rolled onto the ground. Only then did he manage to dodge the crossbow bolt. However, the officer who pushed him down had his head sliced off by the crossbow bolt. Span's face was covered in blood. Just as he was about to jump up, From the opposite side of the bridge came the sound of battle cries. A group of cavalry charged out from the opposite side of the bridge. The horses' hooves trampled the surface of the bridge, and the soldiers on the horse brandished their long swords as they shouted out. Behind them, a large number of infantrymen with red belts on their bodies charged out. "Meet the enemy! Meet the enemy! The enemy has broken through! Archers! Seal off the bridge!" Span brandished his long sword and roared out with all his might. His loud and clear voice reverberated throughout the night, instantly becoming the backbone of the city guards. The archers on both sides of the bridge reacted to the sneak attack by the crossbow bolts, and a dense rain of arrows covered the bridge. In the darkness of the night, the miserable cries of the cavalrymen falling off their horses and the sorrowful cries of the horses falling to the ground could be heard. However, under the dense rain of arrows, there were still a number of cavalrymen who charged out, howling as they charged into the ranks of the city guards. Span roared out with all his might. His long sword had already ignited with the radiance of Do-Chi. As he roared out, his sword cleaved a cavalryman and his horse in half. Amidst the rain of blood, he roared out like a tiger, "Line up! Stop them! Block them back!" The city guards held the absolute advantage in terms of numbers. The infantrymen had already lined up in formation, blocking off the bridge. Although the cavalrymen charged out with all their might, they were only able to forcefully break open a few gaps. Very quickly, more city guards filled up the gap. More and more cavalrymen fell off their horses and died under the swords of the city guards. Not even a complete corpse was left behind. The infantrymen that rushed out from the rear were intercepted by the archers on the bridge and suffered heavy casualties. Only less than half of the total number of infantrymen managed to cross the bridge. At this moment, the city guards had completely stabilized their footing. Under the shouts of their officers, their formation pressed forward step by step. Gradually, they had covered a small half of the bridge. More and more soldiers broke out of the encirclement when they saw that the situation was not good. Some shouted and ran back, while others threw away the weapons in their hands and jumped into the canal. But the battle here had already caused too much commotion. The city guards had already arranged boats on the canal and rowed over. On the river, the city guards in the boats waved their spears and stabbed those who jumped into the water to try to escape. There were also groups of city guards who were ready to take off their armor and jump into the water with short knives in their mouth. After the splashing sound of water, the surface of the water was soon overturned with corpses. Span had already rushed to the end of the line. He grabbed a deputy general and shouted, "I'll leave this to you. Block the bridge and force those bastards to death." He immediately turned over and mounted his warhorse. He roared, "Cavalry, follow me! Damn it! Salvador has escaped." General Span's judgment was not wrong. It was just that it was a little too late. Salvador was indeed no longer in the red zone at this moment. Over the past few days of the blockade, although the city guards had surrounded the red zone so tightly that not even a drop of water could trickle through, the cunning Salvador had already arranged a plan for himself to escape. Over the past few days, because the Emperor had not given the order, the city guards had only surrounded the red zone but not attacked. They still allowed transport vehicles to enter and leave every day, although they had carried out inspections on the transport vehicles. The problem was with the transport vehicles. The transport vehicles that entered and left the red zone, regardless of whether they were transporting food, drinking water, or firewood, there was no problem with the goods they were transporting. The problem was with the horses. Every empty carriage that came out had been swapped out with a different horse. In the red zone, the horses with the best endurance for long-distance running were changed. They were all nailed with high-quality horseshoes. Every time they went in and out, the drivers pulling the carriages were also changed to the most elite soldiers in the red zone. Although the city guards soldiers strictly inspected the carriages, they did not pay attention to the horses pulling the carriages. Originally, these excellent warhorses were deliberately smeared with traces of mud, in order to confuse the public. These excellent warhorses had never had their manes trimmed. They looked sloppy and dirty. Even the drivers pulling the carriages had dirt all over their faces. Not many people would pay attention to these laborers. For the past few days, more than 30 carriages had been stealthily swapped out. At the very least, more than 100 elite cavalrymen had been secretly swapped out from the red zone. At this moment, the one who remained in the red zone was an old subordinate who had followed Salvador for decades. His only task was to lead the remaining soldiers in the red zone to break out of the encirclement and do his best to create as much of a commotion as possible to attract the attention of the city guards. This plan was almost about to succeed. Just as the battle at the canal was fierce, the last 2 water carriages had quickly abandoned the carriages in the alley after passing through the intersection. The more than 100 cavalrymen who had secretly left the red zone for the past few days had already hidden in more than 20 strongholds in the residential area near a street in the western part of the city. At this moment, when the battle at the canal was in full swing, countless city guards heard the bugle and gathered in groups towards the red district. Groups of cavalrymen galloped on the streets. The footsteps of the footmen and the hooves of the cavalrymen mixed together in a clatter. Then, in a street on the west side of the city, over 100 cavalrymen quietly gathered. These cavalrymen had all changed into the armor and standard equipment of the city guards. Taking advantage of the chaos, they swaggered out onto the street and headed in the opposite direction, the West Gate. In this group of rebel soldiers, the one who was surrounded in the middle was Salvador. Salvador had just arrived and was hiding in the buckets of the last 2 carriages. Those buckets were specially made. The inside of the buckets was much shallower than the body of the bucket. There was a hidden space at the bottom of the bucket. Although it was narrow, it was enough for a person to curl up in the most nervous position. Salvador had been operating in the capital for many years. This kind of escape strategy at critical moments was something that he had started many years ago. Those warhorses that never had their manes trimmed were all prepared on a daily basis. Even how to curl up in the most ingenious position in these specially made buckets to save the most space was something that Salvador himself had deliberately practiced on a daily basis. More than 100 cavalrymen passed through the streets and alleys and quickly headed towards the West Gate. In the dark night, no matter how loud the battle cries were in the direction of the red zone behind him, Salvador was most relieved that in front of him, in the direction of the West Gate, it was as quiet as usual. At the West Gate, in the darkness of the night, the torches on the city gate were as bright as day. A black carriage pulled by 4 horses had already arrived at the city gate. The carriage stopped at the city gate tower, and the guards had already gathered. The window of the carriage was pulled open, and a clear and melodious voice came out. "I want to see Lady Giuseppe." As she spoke, a bright badge quickly flashed. Soon, the officer guarding the west gate immediately ran out and stood beside the carriage. The officer named Giuseppe saw the badge. With the help of the light from the torch, he saw the face in the carriage clearly and was immediately shocked. Miss, in the carriage, Tiffany, who was wearing a cloak, smiled faintly and whispered, "I want to send a friend out of the city." Although there was a strict order from the general of the city guards, Giuseppe, who was from the Minas family, did not have the slightest doubt. He took 2 steps back without hesitation, then turned around and shouted in a low voice, "Open the gate." Although some of his subordinates raised questions, the officer just stared at them. Under his usual authority, no one dared to question his orders. Tiffany dismounted from the carriage, and the coachman untied the 2 horses that were pulling the carriage. Tiffany glanced at the officer and whispered, "I've troubled you. It's my honor to be able to serve Mississippi." Giuseppe nodded without hesitation. Tiffany then stood by the window and said to the inside, "Be careful on your way. Go straight north, don't stop on the way." Half of a sad but beautiful face was revealed in the window. Adeline's eyes were filled with tears. "Daphne, let's go." Daphne sighed softly. Begging for votes. Begging for recommendation votes. The data of the recommendation votes is too ugly. Everyone, please help to support more. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 233. Beneath the West City's huge watchtower, the winch rotated and several iron chains, as thick as a man's waist, were coiled up. Pulling on the huge city gate, which weighed over 10,000 jean, it slowly rose. Just as the gate rose to the height of a man, Adeline bit her lip and suddenly whispered, "Daphne, you come with me." Daphne's expression changed. Through the window, she reached out and held Adeline's face. Her slender fingers gently caressed Adeline's soft cheeks as she softly said, "Don't be silly, I'm different from you. I'm the daughter of the Minas family, the Empire's crown princess. If I leave, where's the propriety? Then I won't leave either, I'll stay here with you. Don't be silly." Daphne's expression suddenly changed. She had always been weak, but now there was a hint of decisiveness in her usually gentle eyes. "I've already taken a lot of responsibility by sending you out tonight. Even this Mr. Giuseppe will be punished, and now you say you won't leave. Don't argue anymore, leave at once." Adeline could only cry. She looked at the city gate that was still slowly rising, and then at Daphne. She bit her lips hard, but could not say a single word. "Sigh." Daphne sighed faintly, her eyes full of pity. "His Majesty doesn't like you for a day or two. Without Garcia here, no one in the Empire can protect you. His Majesty's actions this time are too crazy. Once he succeeds, he will no longer have any scruples. If you stay here, I'm afraid he'll give the order to kill you at any time. Just as the two girls were reluctant to part, the sound of hurried horse hooves suddenly came from the distant street. Everyone's expression changed. Daphne and Adeline also turned pale in an instant. Turning back to look, at the end of the street, a group of about 100 horses came whistling through the air. Although they were wearing the armor of the city guard, they showed no intention of slowing down as they galloped from afar. A murderous aura. The officer named Giuseppe's expression changed. Taking a few steps forward, he shouted, "Who goes there? The city gate is a restricted area. You are not allowed to gallop on horseback." Giuseppe shouted twice, but the horsemen in the distance continued on their way. Not only did they not slow down, they even sped up. He was only 100 steps away from here. Giuseppe's expression changed drastically. She suddenly yelled, "Close the door! Close the gates!" He had already unsheathed his sword and stepped forward to grab the stunned Daphne. "Miss, get in the car and leave. Quick!" After Daphne was shoved into the carriage, the officer called Giuseppe closed the door and turned around, shouting, "Prepare for battle! Line up! Archers, aim!" Whoosh! A sharp arrow pierced through the air and pierced through his throat. The officer's eyes bulged out as he clutched at his throat that was gushing with blood. Then, he fell backward. His back slammed heavily into the car door. With a loud bang, the two girls in the car felt their hearts sink. The howling battle cries rang out in an instant. The mounted rebel soldiers charged forward and fired a volley of arrows. The coachman on the carriage tried to swing his whip to block the arrows, but he was quickly turned into a sitting duck. Mournful cries rang out as the horses were struck by the arrows. They quickly ran forward, bringing the carriage with them. After the horses that were pulling the carriage fell, the carriage came to a halt and slammed into the wall beside it. The two girls inside cried out in alarm. From time to time, they could hear the sound of arrows nailing into the wooden boards of the carriage. The sound of galloping horses had reached them, and the mounted soldiers had reached the city tower. Although the soldiers defending the city had tried their best to form a formation to stop them, most of the city guards had been sent to the red zone to besiege the enemy. Thus, the number of soldiers left behind at the city gate was clearly weak. The rebel soldiers of the Salvatore family were the best of the best. The mounted soldiers at the front quickly charged into the ranks of the defending soldiers and slaughtered them back and forth. The mounted soldiers knew very well that if they could not break through the enemy and rush out of Osgilla, once the city guards reacted and mobilized a large number of troops, the only thing that awaited them was death. Salvatore drew his sword amidst the chaos. Although he had 2 elite guards from his family by his side, there was no need for him, the leader, to fight personally. However, his roar was enough to raise the morale of the soldiers. Kill. If you want to live, kill. The elite level of the mounted soldiers of the Salvatore family far exceeded that of the city guards. This was especially true for the 100-plus mounted soldiers. Every one of them was the best of the best. Even in the darkness, there were flashes of Do-Chi. The experts of the family took advantage of the darkness to charge at the city guards. Soon, many of the city guards were killed or injured. Put down the city gate. They want to charge out. Put down the city gate. Stop them. In the midst of the chaos, the other officers on the city tower shouted loudly. The defending soldiers on the city walls also heard the commotion. A few groups of people tried to charge down the steps, but Salvatore was very smart. He had already sent 2 groups of people to block the steps that led to the top of the city walls. He used the war horses and knights' swords to block the path of reinforcements on the city walls. There were originally only a few dozen soldiers under the city gate. The 2 charges from the mounted soldiers completely destroyed them. In a moment of desperation, an officer shouted loudly, "Cut down the capstan! Cut it down!" A soldier rushed to the capstan and waved his sword to cut it down. The rebel soldiers in the distance noticed this action. Once the capstan was cut down, the heavy gates would be lowered. Then, no one would be able to charge out of the city. Shio! A sharp arrow shot out and pierced through the city guard who was trying to cut off the winch. His corpse lay on the winch. The other 2 soldiers rushed up and tried to finish the job, but they were quickly shot to death by the arrow while screaming in pain. Salvatore's eyes flashed. His gaze was sharp and bright. He continued to shout with all his might. However, at this moment, the sound of hurried horse hooves could be heard from the street behind them. In the dark night, they could clearly see the light of torches rapidly approaching. "Sir, the pursuers are here." 2 guards anxiously shouted in a low voice. "What are you panicking for? There's still a long way to go. Charge out. As long as we charge out, we will succeed." Although Salvatore's palms were sweaty at this moment, he still displayed the calmness of a commander. He was very clear that he was the leader. If he panicked, then the people below him would. The pursuers were General Span and his mounted soldiers. He had brought his own mounted soldiers to chase along the way. Because they had been delayed by the sudden counterattack of the people from the red zone, and because they had spent a lot of time searching for traces of the rebel soldiers in the dark night, they had finally caught up. Span could already hear the sounds of fighting from the city gates. He was extremely anxious. If Salvatore escaped, then he, seeing that there was only 1 street left, they would be able to reach the city gates after a few hundred meters. Span was anxious. He raised his sword and shouted, "Quick! Quick, quick, quick!" The mounted soldiers kicked the bellies of their horses with all their might to urge them forward. A long line of mounted soldiers charged through the street. The street was not wide. Due to the narrow street, the hundreds of mounted soldiers could only move forward on 2 horses side by side. The line of mounted soldiers was stretched very long. At this moment, a loud rumbling sound suddenly rang out from the dark night. 2 tall buildings by the side of the street suddenly collapsed. The collapsed buildings had the front wall of the street in front of them. The rubble and broken walls immediately sealed off the road. Shoo! The mounted soldiers who were charging forward with all their might subconsciously pulled on the reins of their horses to slow down, causing the line to fall into chaos. Span, who was charging at the front, was shocked. Before he could react, the sound of something piercing through the air could be heard from the darkness. Enemy attack! Span's heart sank. He could hear the miserable cries of the mounted soldiers beside him as they fell off their horses. Span shouted, "Enemy attack! Dismount! Dismount! Left team, circle up!" Just as he finished shouting, a sharp arrow shot into his shoulder. Span cried out in pain and fell off his horse. He rolled on the ground twice, and the arrow shaft in his shoulder was broken. Only then did he manage to get up. Raising his head, he could see tens of black figures moving about on the rooftops of the houses on both sides of the street. Those fellows were all armed with bows and arrows. They stood on the rooftops and fired at the mounted soldiers on the street. Span's mounted soldiers had already suffered over 10 casualties. He endured the pain and jumped up to grab one of his officers. "Take 10 men and circle up, bastards! Circle up!" It was unknown where the men on the rooftops came from. After a few rounds of firing, the black-clad archers quickly retreated. Under the cover of the night, they shuttled back and forth on the rooftops, fighting as they retreated. As for Span's mounted soldiers, they were all wearing armor. It would be difficult for them to climb up the rooftops to launch a counterattack. Additionally, the ambushers did not seem to have any intention of fighting them head-on. They slowly retreated while firing arrows, using their bows to effectively slow down the advance of Span's mounted soldiers. Bit by bit they delayed their pursuers. Although Span was so angry that he wanted to vomit blood, he could only shout in vain. "Bows and arrows! Damn it, bows and arrows!" Span swore in his heart that after this matter, he would equip every single one of his mounted soldiers with a crossbow. The distance between them was only a few hundred meters, but Span's men were still unable to charge over. At this moment, the battle below the city gates had reached its final moments. Salvador could already hear the sounds of the battle from afar. His heart was filled with doubt. Who was it that helped him block off the pursuers? However, this was not the time for him to think about other things. He could only shout out repeatedly, commanding his men to charge towards the city gates. A few of the rebel soldiers had already rushed to the capstan that controlled the gate. 2 of them worked together to pull the rope, while the others formed a circular formation to protect the gates. The heavy gates creaked as they were pulled up once more. Very quickly, it was pulled up to a height of 2 meters. The rebel soldiers cheered, their morale greatly boosted. The defenders below the city walls finally collapsed. The remaining soldiers shouted and scattered in all directions. The 2 girls who were hiding in the carriage felt their hearts pounding wildly. Their faces were pale as they hugged each other tightly. At that moment, the carriage door was slammed open with a bang. One of the rebel soldiers poked his head in from outside. When he saw the 2 girls, he was stunned. Adeline saw that and sent a kick over, landing squarely on the rebel soldier's face. The fellow staggered back a few steps. Following that, more rebel soldiers rushed forward and pulled the 2 girls out of the carriage. Salvador had already arrived before them. When he saw the 2 captives, the military minister was stunned for a moment. Then, a strange smile appeared on his face. "Look, who did you catch? Ha ha! It seems the heavens are really looking after me. A future empress. Oh, and a princess. Ha 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 ha. 2 cute little girls. Could it be that they accidentally got lost at night and ended up here?" Daphne took a deep breath and tried her best to maintain her composure. "Sir Salvador, tie them up. Bring them along. Ha 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 ha." Salvador did not waste any time with them. 2 rebel soldiers came forward and picked up the tied-up girls. Then, they tossed them onto their horses. With a loud whistle, the rebel army charged out of the city gate. There was no one on the bridge outside the city. The rebel soldiers charged out in a single file, charging across the bridge and galloping away. At that moment, the soldiers on the walls had charged down from the city gate. The rebel soldiers blocking the steps were all dead, and they were no longer able to stop the reinforcements from coming in. However, a few rebel soldiers who were at the very back of the group stood in front of the capstan with ferocious smiles on their faces. They brandished their swords with a few loud bangs. The capstan was cut apart. Following the loss of control of the iron chain, the heavy gate fell down with a loud bang. In order for the soldiers to go out and give chase, they would have to at least repair the gate. On the other side of the bridge, on the opposite bank of the river, there were originally 2 sentry towers. According to the usual practice, there would be a small team of city guards stationed there to inspect the people entering and leaving the city. When the rebel soldiers charged over, they had assumed that they would have to go through a fierce battle. However, when they reached the bridge, they found that the place was silent. There were no longer any survivors under the sentry tower. The small team of city guards that had been stationed there had been reduced to tens of corpses lying on the ground. "Stop!" Salvador quickly reined in his warhorse as he looked at the scene before him in shock. At that moment, several men in black leapt out from the sentry tower. In the darkness of the night, a figure stood at the highest point, coldly looking down at the rebel soldiers and Salvador. Salvador noticed that the men in black were wielding swords with blood dripping down the edges of their swords. "Who are you people?" Salvador gritted his teeth. The man in black suddenly smiled. He jumped down from the tower and landed before the rebel soldiers. The rebel soldiers' swords were right before his eyes, but he showed no fear. Instead, he raised his head to look at Salvador and said, "Is this how you thank those who helped you escape?" Salvador sneered. He gripped his sword tightly and said, "Just who are you?" The man in black smiled faintly and walked in front of Salvador. Salvador raised his hand and gestured for his subordinates to not stop him. He allowed the man to walk in front of him. The black-clothed man looked at Salvador as he pulled up the black veil on his face and quickly covered it again. Only the 2 guards beside Salvador and Salvador himself could see the black-clothed man's appearance clearly. Salvador's face immediately changed. "You? It's you?" He looked around and lowered his voice. "Sir Junker? Your dark night imperial forest betrayed the Emperor. I never thought that you would be the one to help me escape." The man in black in front of him, the moment he lifted his mask, his face clearly fell into Salvador's eyes. It was so real. It was the leader of the Dark Knight Imperial Forest, who had always been loyal to the Emperor. Junker. Salvador instantly understood. Only the elite warriors of the Dark Knight Imperial Forest could forcefully block the pursuers from behind. They also had the ability to kill all the soldiers at the sentry tower and clear a path for themselves. "You? Why?" Salvador directly asked the most important question. "To let you escape." Junker said faintly, "This is not an easy task. I have people in the city guards, and I have made all the preparations. Even if you did not arrange such a plan to escape, I could still think of a way to get you out during the final attack on the red zone. However, Sir Salvador is indeed Sir Salvador. You really have your own way of escaping." Salvador stared at Junker. "I still have the same question. Why? Is Junker going to join me?" Thinking of the hundreds of elites in the Dark Knight Imperial Forest, Salvador could not help but feel a little excited. After all, this was a rare elite force. "Go quickly, don't let my efforts go to waste." Junker shook his head. "In order to let you escape successfully, I have already lost several of my best men. Lord Salvatore, run. After you escape, do what you want to do. Remember, you must do a great job. Ha 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 ha. Come with me." Salvador was indeed a person with power in a high position. He immediately tried to recruit him. "I will definitely not let you down." Junker still shook his head and looked at Salvador. "You misunderstood me." "Oh right, let me give you a piece of advice." "Go ahead. I know that after you escape from the capital, you must immediately go to Marika City in the military districts of Armenia to see Governor Hughes. Because this is the military district closest to the capital. As long as you escape to the military districts of Armenia, you will not have to worry about the city guards chasing after you. Junker quickly said, however, Sir Salvador, I hope you remember my advice. You are now the leader of the Red Round Table, but once the empire collapses, the Red Round Table will also collapse. Governor Hughes is the next chairman of the Red Round Table, and you are the current chairman. Do you think that once the empire's civil war erupts, you will still be able to get along? No matter what kind of power it is, there will always be a leader. And under normal circumstances, there can only be one leader. Votes. I need a recommendation vote. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 234. Today is a day of national mourning. Let us appeal to our fellow countrymen who met with disaster in the earthquake. Everyone, do something, whether it is money or effort, even if it is just to appeal. Do something. Not for anything else, but for the word, fellow countrymen. Chapter 220. Fanatical aristocrats. No matter how one looked at it, the current governor of the military districts of Armenia, General Hughes, could be considered a person with real power in the Byzantine Empire. Moreover, he was at the top of the hierarchy. If one were to make a list of people the emperor hates, then Governor Hughes would definitely be one of the names on the list. Moreover, he would definitely be at the top of the list. The military districts of Armenia, with the capital city of Marika as the center, were made up of 6 surrounding cities and dozens of villages. Most importantly, Armenia was rich in iron ore. This made the military districts of Armenia one of the top 3 military districts in the empire. What made the imperial family even more worried was that the military districts of Armenia were too close to the imperial capital Osgiliath. It was the military district closest to the imperial capital. If everything went smoothly, it would only take 3 days to rush from Marika to Osgiliath. With such a big tiger sleeping next to their bed, no emperor would be able to sleep well. Governor Hughes was not yet 50 years old. Generally speaking, he was at the peak of a man's power. He had enough experience and accumulated years of experience. At the same time, he was not old to the point of being muddle-headed. What also made the imperial family worried was that Governor Hughes could be considered an excellent leader. His family had owned the military districts of Armenia for 70 years. He was the 3rd generation. Among the 3 generations of governors, the military districts of Armenia had developed to the peak under his leadership. The military districts of Armenia under his rule were more prosperous and powerful than the previous governors. As the 3rd generation governor of the family, General Hughes had considerable wisdom. His personality also had the advantages of success: decisive, tenacious, ambitious, and when it was necessary to compromise, he would show enough cunning. It was worth mentioning that Governor Hughes had a characteristic that was widely circulated amongst the upper echelons of the empire. Even though his official position was the governor of a military region, and he also held the rank of a general of the empire, Governor Hughes had never been a qualified soldier. In his resume, he had only experienced one war, and that was when the current emperor, Kantos, was young. He had led the empire's army to resist the invasion of the Ottoman Empire. During that war, Hughes, who was still serving in the army, at that time, the governor of Armenia was still Hughes's father. As the deputy flag-bearer of an emblem group, he had experienced the only battle in his life. That battle had ended with the defeat of the empire's army. The only thing Hughes learned from that battle was that when Odin went crazy, they were far more savage than you could imagine. This became a flaw in his personality, Throughout his life, he always had an indescribable fear of the Odin country, even though he usually hid this fear very deeply. It could be said that Governor Hughes was the kind of person who ruled with an iron fist internally and lacked a strong leader externally. Another characteristic of his personality was that General Hughes seemed to have an irresistible yearning for the aristocracy. In other words, although he was a soldier in name, an imperial general, and a governor, however, it was as if he always wished that he could become a true noble. Yes, this Governor Hughes was a standard aristocrat complex. Even in his daily life, he strictly held himself to the standards of an aristocrat. It could be said that if you didn't know Governor Hughes, you would think that he was more like an aristocrat than 90% of the aristocrats in the empire. First of all, he paid great attention to etiquette. Basically, he carried out the etiquette of the aristocrats in his life meticulously. He liked to wear magnificent clothes, and at the same time, he also learned the benevolence of the aristocrats. The definition of this aristocratic benevolence was that he might often show his kindness to some lower-class people. But this kindness was just for show. It didn't mean that he really had compassion in his heart. It was just for the sake of showing his benevolent side. He might occasionally say a few kind words to his coachman or even his gardener, and even affectionately pat the other party's shoulder. But the real purpose of his politeness was to remind the other party, "I will always be the master, and you will always be the servant. I can occasionally show my kindness, and that will make me appear very noble. But if you dare to forget your identity, then you will be overstepping your boundaries." In addition, Governor Hughes paid great attention to the aristocratic lifestyle. For example, he was very picky about food and clothing. He liked to hold a banquet in his magnificent governor's mansion after every prayer day, and invited celebrities from all walks of life to participate in this event. In these balls or banquets, he would wear the most traditional aristocratic attire. He would even wear a wig on some major festivals. Also, Governor Hughes fanatically yearned for the aristocratic culture and civilization. Everyone knew that the Real aristocrats paid great attention to tradition and family glory. Unfortunately, Governor Hughes' family didn't have any traditions to be proud of. His family was only 3 generations old. His grandfather was the first governor of the military districts of Armenia. In fact, when his grandfather was young, he was just a soldier in the army. He only made his fortune by taking advantage of the war. His grandfather didn't even learn to write his own name until he was 20 years old. In Governor Hughes' generation, Hughes had learned at least 3 languages and could write poems in the aristocratic style. What's more, in order to satisfy his aristocratic dream, he once spent a lot of money to hire the empire's first-class heraldry experts and historians. Through a series of incredible verifications, they tried to prove that his family's ancestors had a noble bloodline. Under the influence of large amounts of gold coins, some scholars gave in and discovered that Governor Hughes' ancestors had the royal bloodline of an ancient kingdom. Of course, more people thought that this so-called discovery was simply fabricated. However, Governor Hughes didn't think so. He spent more money to let those experts verify the noble bloodline's emblem and various traditions. He also revised a thick genealogy book. It was said that the genealogy book was thicker than the imperial code. It could be said that Governor Hughes was an anomaly among all the military governors. On the one hand, he was the military governor and the beneficiary of the Tema military district system. At the same time, he had to do his best to protect the interests of this group. On the other hand, Governor Hughes seemed to disdain to associate with those governors. He was more inclined to make friends with the aristocrats. In this regard, he was actually a very contradictory person, because everyone knew that the military governors existed for the purpose of fighting against the imperial family, and the aristocrats were loyal supporters of the imperial rule. Therefore, if Governor Hughes really wanted to be a complete aristocrat, then he must first be truly loyal to the imperial family. On the other hand, what made Governor Hughes embarrassed was that he didn't have a real aristocratic title. Until now, the title on his head was only a lord. This lowest title was not even recognized as a real aristocratic title at all. Everyone knew that Governor Hughes dreamed that the emperor could give him a real aristocratic title. There was even a joke in the upper echelons of the empire. If the emperor wanted to remove the threat of the military districts of Armenia, he didn't need thousands of troops at all. He only needed to promise to give Hughes the title of Count or Marquis. Maybe Governor Hughes would lead his troops to surrender. Salvatore and Hughes were old acquaintances, so he was well aware of his colleague's special hobbies. After killing his way out of the capital, he led his men all the way into the military districts of Armenia. After getting rid of the pursuers behind him, he finally came to Marika City and the governor's mansion. Although Salvatore urgently needed to meet with Governor Hughes immediately to discuss important matters, he was politely informed by the governor's mansion's housekeeper in formal attire that the governor was having afternoon tea and asked the Honorable Salvatore to wait for a moment. When the governor finished his afternoon tea and changed his clothes, he would immediately come to see him. Looking at the housekeeper who was dressed like a palace steward, Salvatore suppressed his impatience. He was familiar with Hughes and knew that this guy was fanatical about aristocratic life. The aristocratic afternoon tea time was simply sacred in this guy's heart. However, Salvatore and his party still received generous hospitality from the governor's mansion. Everyone was given good food and rest. In the process of breaking out, Salvatore had more than 100 elites, but less than 60 people made it into Marika City. Among these 60 people, there were a few injured people who also received adequate care here. At this moment, in the small conference room of the governor's mansion, Salvatore only brought 2 of his trusted guards with him, as well as the 2 ladies, Adeline and Daphne. The 2 ladies rubbed their numb wrists and sat helplessly on the chairs, looking dejected. After a full half an hour, Governor Hughes finally appeared. Governor Hughes, who was less than 50 years old, was tall and slender. He looked much younger than Salvatore. His face was the kind of sickly pale that aristocrats dreamed of. He even had a black mole on his left cheek and his beard was extremely neatly trimmed. When Governor Hughes walked into the reception room, his first action was not to go forward and greet Salvatore. His eyes immediately fell on the 2 girls, and then his eyes suddenly lit up. He quickly walked past Salvatore and came in front of the 2 girls. Then, with an elegant smile on his face, he nodded slightly and bowed slightly. He held Daphne's hand and gestured to her with his lips. It was a standard hand kiss that could not be more standard. "It's an honor to meet you, Your Highness." Taking a step back, he held Adeline's hand and kissed it again. "I hope that the 2 of you can enjoy your time here. I promise that you will receive treatment befitting of your status here." Salvatore didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He just coldly watched Hughes complete his aristocratic greeting. In the end, when Governor Hughes finally turned to face him, Salvatore went forward and hugged him. Hughes seemed to be very uncomfortable with this kind of hug. In fact, from what he understood, aristocrats of status would never greet someone with such a vulgar greeting. "I need to have a good talk with you immediately." Salvatore stared into Hughes's eyes. Although they had known each other for a long time, the 2 of them had never been friends. Never. "I know you're in a hurry." Hughes was not in a hurry. "But there's no need to be in a hurry." Next, this aristocratic governor actually pretended to chat with the 2 girls for a long time. He complimented each other's beauty for a while, and even talked about a few topics about the weather. Adeline and Daphne were clearly very embarrassed. They were the captives of the rebel army, lambs that had fallen into the enemy's hands. However, Governor Hughes acted as if he was entertaining 2 distinguished guests at a banquet. As Salvatore's expression became more and more unsightly, Hughes finally ended his aristocratic performance. He seemed to be very satisfied with this process. Then, he slowly raised his hand and summoned the bearded butler. Bring the two noble ladies to rest. Give them the best treatment. Make sure our distinguished guests are satisfied. Salvatore immediately frowned. He did not expect this guy to openly try to snatch the two important captives from his hands. However, Salvatore hesitated for a moment before silently agreeing to this action. After all, he was now in the enemy's territory. All right, can we get down to business now? After the two girls were brought out, Salvatore asked in a very low voice. Those who were familiar with him knew that this was a sign that his patience had reached a critical point. Don't be anxious, my friend. Hughes slowly sat down and took out a handkerchief to wipe the corner of his mouth. He smiled. In fact, I have already made all the preparations. My elite infantry regiment has already made all the preparations yesterday. I hope this news can effectively alleviate your anxiety. Salvatore sighed in relief, and his expression became slightly better. However, I also have a question. Hughes still had a smile on his face. I only have 20,000 standing troops. In imperial capital Osgelia, there are now more than 40,000 troops. This does not include the other central standing troops that have quickly gathered after hearing the news. What do you think I should do? I can mobilize more troops, but as you know, my territory just suffered a snowstorm last winter. I have a shortage of food and… Enough! Salvatore coldly interrupted Hughes. He stared at Hughes. I think you understand the situation we are facing now. That old madman with the crown has finally gone mad. Now is the best chance for us. The Emperor wants to eradicate all of us, Hughes. All of us. This is a war. This is an official declaration of war. All the governors of the Tema military district will be involved. I need your troops to immediately attack Osgelia. Because you are the closest military district to Osgelia, you must march at once to show our unyielding attitude. Let everyone in the Empire know that we, the supporters of the system, will never compromise. Do you understand? Hughes smiled but did not speak. I think I don't need to remind you that because of the location of the military districts of Armenia, the old emperor will gather all the troops in his hands to attack this place as soon as possible. Salvatore sneered. One division of the city guards, the Imperial Guards, and the newly reorganized 2nd and 9th Divisions will total more than 60,000 troops. These troops will appear in front of you as soon as possible. The Emperor will first try to wipe out Armenia and eliminate the biggest threat around him. So, Hughes, you can beat around the bush with me here, or put on airs with me. To be honest, I hate your aristocratic tone. You're not aristocrat at all. You're not. You know this very well. Those aristocrats hate us and despise us. In their hearts, we, the governors of the military districts, are just a group of nouveau riche. Hughes finally stopped smiling. He slowly said, as you said, the Emperor will gather at least 60,000 troops. The strength of the military districts of Armenia is not enough to face the 3 central standing divisions alone. You are not fighting alone. Salvatore made a promise. My territory is already mobilizing. My troops will move out as soon as possible. At the same time, all 54 of our military regions will also be present. Each of them will be displaying their strength. Of course, as the vanguard, Armenia will be compensated to a certain extent. Salvatore stopped here and took a deep breath. I will personally make a promise. In the future, once Osgelia is captured, the original Osgelia and the capital will be included in your territory in the future. You will have the greatest city in the world as your capital. Although this is only my personal promise, I promise that when the time comes to make a collective decision, my allies and I will support this proposal. I think, with you and your allies, we will have more than half of the votes in the Round Table Conference. It's a very tempting suggestion. Hughes narrowed his eyes. His eyes were full of smiles. Osgiliath, Miracle City, as the new capital of my Armenia district. Sounds like a very good proposal. Looking for recommendation votes. If you want to know what happens next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 235. Request for recommendation votes. Chapter 221. The curtain rises. Governor Hughes stood up and smiled faintly. Then what's your plan, Sir Salvatore? In my plan, you are the key, said Salvatore solemnly. Salvador said solemnly, although our collective strength has the absolute advantage, we also have our greatest weakness. We are not a single entity, we are a group. We have too many members, and I cannot be certain that all of our members have a firm will. You should know, some are easily swayed while some are unambitious and only want to follow the rules. Some only want to maintain the status quo. But now it is time for us to make a choice. There is no maintaining the status quo or maintaining the balance. There will be no such thing in the future. We are facing a war, and I must ensure that all the members of our group will take the same action. Now that the Emperor has taken the risk, he has made the most insane move. We must show our unyielding and resolute attitude. If we hesitate or show weakness, then all the members of our group may be swayed. After all, you know that the governors of the Northeast region do not have much ambition. Those fellows simply do not have the courage to overthrow this empire. They just want to be honest landlords. We must break those fellows' illusions. There is no need for you to tell me these things. I am not an idiot. Hughes shook his head. I need to hear more conditions that are beneficial to me. He looked into Salvatore's eyes, and the kindness in his eyes slowly faded away, replaced by a sharp glint. Osgiliath belongs to me. That sounds good, but do you think that is enough? Don't be too naive, Salvatore. Osgiliath is very close to me, just beside my palm. In the future, when we overthrow this empire, it does not matter if you agree or not, this place will be mine. Because this place is too close to my territory. With the exception of me, no one else can get this place. In other words, no matter what happens, this place will be mine in the future. There was a mocking tone in his voice. You cannot use something that belongs to me in the first place to bribe me, can you? That is ridiculous. Salvador was at a loss for words. He exhaled and looked into Hughes's eyes. What do you want? Hughes smiled. When he smiled, his eyes curved slightly. Then, he took out a piece of paper from his sleeve. On it was a list of items. He slowly pushed it to the other side of the table. Salvador glanced at it and took a deep breath. You actually made a list? Of course. Hughes smiled. What else do you think I was doing during the afternoon tea? Salvador snorted heavily. He picked up the piece of paper and looked at it. The ink on it was indeed new, especially the last line. It was obvious that it had been written not too long ago. Salvatore hurriedly skimmed through it, and his face darkened to the extreme. Your asking price is too high. You have to know that you're doing this for yourself. But the bird that sticks out gets shot. Hughes smiled lazily and said, I'm the first to stand up. I'll be attacked by the Royalist army with all their might. Moreover, you're all too far away. I'll be the first to bear the brunt of their strongest attack. So, I think it's reasonable to ask for some compensation. Military expenses, food, weapons. Humph, your Armenia produces the best iron ore. Do you still need us to provide weapons? Salvador frowned with dissatisfaction. Oh, I don't need weapons, but I need horses. Hughes's attitude became firm. 10,000 high-quality horses. Note, I'm talking about horses. If I see a horse or mule, I can't promise that I won't do anything irrational in my anger. 10,000 horses is not a small number. Do you want to equip a cavalry division? Salvador sighed. I can only promise that I will try my best to persuade the other members and allies to agree to your conditions. Very good. Then, can we celebrate our happy cooperation first? Hughes smiled. Salvador snorted and looked at the last line of words added at the end. You want both Daphne and Adeline? Your appetite is quite big, my old friend. Of course. I'm very happy to hear that you're coming. And I'm even more overjoyed to hear that you've brought these two precious gifts. So, during afternoon tea, I made a small addition to this list. Daphne. Salvador sneered. Her title of Crown Princess is just a joke to us. However, she is a member of the Minas family. No matter what, having a hostage of the Minas family is a big bargaining chip. Humph, your plan is quite good. And Adeline, what are you thinking? Is she from the Odin Empire? Don't forget, our princess title is not only from Byzantium. I've heard that in the Odin Empire, the powerful Odin Emperor has always been concerned about his little niece. Fine, I promise you. Even if I object, you won't allow me to take them away. Salvador shook his head and finally stared at Hughes. I want to remind you. Consider it a kind advice. Cooperating with the Odin Empire is fine if you have no other choice, however, if you want to become friends with the Odin Empire, you will regret it in the future. I will remember your advice. Hughes raised his eyelids. Salvador felt relieved and he put away the list. I don't have time to stay here. I must leave immediately. There are still many things waiting for me to do. I can guarantee that my army will move out tomorrow morning and put on a show of force against the Ostgilla Empire. Hughes quickly made a practical promise. However, I will not send my men to die for nothing. 10 days. I need you and your other allies to respond within 10 days. Otherwise, you know what that means. Salvador glanced at Hughes. Then, he got up and strode toward the door. When he reached the door, he suddenly stopped and turned to look at Hughes. Change it. What? The Armenian region you just mentioned, I think. The Kingdom of Armenia might be a better name, His Majesty King Hughes. Hughes smiled. He also looked at Salvador with a complicated gaze. I think this is a good idea. At the same time, I think the Kingdom of Rodriguez is a very good name. Your Majesty, King Salvador. The training ground was in full swing. In the distance, the young men were galloping quickly on their war horses. Small teams were constantly making various tactical formations. Nearby, some recruits were doing the most basic assassination training. These were the most basic cavalry combat skills. There was a big difference between assassination on horseback and infantrymen. After days of training, these recruits who had just been added to the 13th Corps already looked like cavalry. After the last war, the 13th Corps, which had suffered heavy losses, was once again reorganized. Anyway, for the corps with the highest casualty rate in the history of the Empire, this was already a common occurrence. Most of the soldiers transferred from other units were veterans. Replenishing them in this way could minimize the loss of combat effectiveness. For these newcomers, they were not rookies. The only thing they needed to do was to integrate into the 13th Corps. But the biggest problem was, many of the new recruits were not cavalry. Although some of them were cavalry in other units, they were far from qualified by the standards of the 13th Corps. Ruhr's strategy was to transfer some of the original mounted infantry under the 13th Division to supplement the real cavalry force, while the foreign recruits would be added to the original mounted infantry emblem group. At this moment, the plump Ruhr stood beside the training ground. He narrowed his eyes and looked at a group of soldiers who were practicing on the training ground. These soldiers were imitating the standard movements of an assassination on horseback under the guidance of the instructor. Ruhr's eyes were fixed on a figure standing on the left of the first row. That slender figure was none other than the special observer sent from the capital, the Crown Prince of the Empire, His Highness Garcia. He did not know what was wrong with His Highness. On the first day he was sent to the army, he made a strange request. He wanted to go down to the lowest level of the army to eat, live, and train with the soldiers. He wanted to experience a real military life. Roar initially thought that His Highness was just being whimsical, but after these few days, he realized that His Highness was serious. It was rumored that the Crown Prince, who paid the most attention to his appearance and etiquette, had been in the front line with the other soldiers. Every day, he would be covered in dirt on the training ground. He lived in the simplest tent and ate in the same pot with the other soldiers. He didn't even take a bath for a few days. He was covered in sweat and squeezed in the tent with the other soldiers. At this moment, looking at the young man holding a lance on the training ground, Roar sighed in his heart. Who would dare to say that His Highness was an incompetent gigolo? They must be blind. In the entire army, there were less than 10 people who knew His Highness. The other soldiers at the bottom did not know this new comrade beside them. Anyway, there were many new recruits who had joined recently. Roar had the adjutant beside him invite the Crown Prince, who was in the middle of training. Then, under the shocked eyes of all the soldiers, he personally took off his cloak and put it on the Crown Prince. Then, he solemnly saluted him. There was a commotion in the ranks. The Crown Prince sighed. He wiped the sweat off his forehead and looked at Roar. It seems my life as a soldier is over? Yes, it ended early. Roar smiled bitterly. I am sorry, Your Highness. From now on, you can no longer continue to experience the life of a soldier in the front line. We need you to stand in a more important position. Garcia nodded. He did not immediately say anything. Instead, he used the water that the adjutant beside him brought over to wash his face. After wiping the water off his face, he sighed. The imperial capital, something happened? Yes. Roar took out an urgent military order that had just been sent over from the imperial capital. Your Highness, war has come. Garcia's face did not show a trace of surprise. He just nodded and took the order. After glancing at it, he sighed. It seems that father has indeed made his move. The murderer who killed my teacher, has he not found him yet? Roar rolled his eyes. You have seen the contents of the military report. I don't know more than you. Fatso cursed in his heart. What kind of show is this? That old bastard Cavashier is really dead? What kind of joke is this? Fatso thought so in his heart, but on the surface, he was serious. We must move out as fast as possible. Then, we must rush to the imperial capital to save the emperor. His Majesty has issued an assembly order. All the troops loyal to the imperial capital must draw close to the imperial capital and form a coalition to suppress the rebels. The fate of the country depends on this battle. At this point, Fatso paused for a moment and continued with a straight face. This order, His Majesty has issued it to all places. It is written very clearly on it, Your Highness Garcia. His Majesty has said that once there is any abnormal situation in the war, that is to say, if there is any misfortune, it must be His Majesty himself. Then, you will have the right to be crowned the Emperor immediately and continue to lead the Empire to the final victory. To the final victory. Garcia pursed his lips with a complicated smile. The final victory, if such a thing really exists, let's talk about it later. The imperial capital, the southern dock area of the city. This was the base of the Gallant's Chamber of Commerce in the imperial capital. The area near the dock was an important commercial area of the imperial capital. All the large chambers of commerce on the mainland had their own strongholds and warehouses here. At this moment, the person in charge of the Gallant's Chamber of Commerce in the imperial capital, Gurode, whose figure was quite similar to General Roar, was frowning and worrying about something. The imperial capital had been completely sealed off. The dock was closed and the city gates were closed. Coupled with the incident of Salvador breaking out of the encirclement in the red zone 2 days ago and breaking the city gates to escape to the west, The level of martial law in the city had suddenly increased by a lot. It was said that the red zone had been filled with blood. The last captive was not spared. The furious His Majesty ordered them all to be executed. Even the process of trial was skipped. General Span of the city guards suffered the wrath of His Majesty because his greatest enemy, Salvador, had unexpectedly escaped. General Span was stripped of his title and removed from his position on the spot. However, His Majesty allowed him to continue to stay in the city guards as a deputy general to atone for his crimes. As for the new commander of the city guards, he would temporarily let the Vice Minister of Military Affairs, the former 13th Army General Audiobook, take charge. With Adric's prestige in the military, it was enough for him to take on this heavy responsibility. But the problem was that General Adric wasn't in the imperial capital right now. He was patrolling the northeast of the empire and organizing local military affairs. For Gurod, his biggest problem was that because the imperial capital was completely sealed off, it was very difficult for him to transmit information to the outside world. As the head of intelligence, he was very clear that the Byzantine Empire was facing a huge change, and this change would also have a profound impact on the Lantis kingdom. He had to do something. And today, an unexpected guest came to visit. Sitting in front of Gurod was a girl who looked at most 20 years old. She was wearing a white gown and had some freckles on her face. Her appearance was delicate and pretty, but that was all. She couldn't be considered a beauty. Only the heavens knew how this delicate little girl, who looked weak and scholarly, came to the southern part of the city to see him in this chaotic imperial capital. The only reason Gurod wanted to see this girl was because this girl called herself, "I am the disciple of Sir Cavashir." Cavashir? Anything that had anything to do with this name would become complicated. Therefore, Gu Luo immediately met this girl who looked very gentle and quiet. "You don't need to know my name. You only need to know that I am the disciple of Sir Cavashir." The girl sat in front of Gurod. "I know that your name is Gurod, a citizen of Lantis, 36 years old, a military officer of the Lantis Kingdom's Intelligence Bureau. From the information I have, you are the 5th candidate for the position of Minister of General Affairs of the Lantis Kingdom's Intelligence Bureau in the next 20 years. Hearing these few words, Gurod's expression suddenly changed. "You don't need to worry. This information was placed on my teacher's desk long before you came to the imperial capital." The girl's tone was casual, as if she was describing a simple fact. "Cavashir? Sir Cavashir, why is he looking for me?" Gurod swallowed his saliva, then he asked a question that everyone was concerned about. "Sir Cavashir, is he really still alive?" The girl's brows furrowed, but her expression was very calm. "This question, to be honest, I am also troubled by it. I can only say that I do not wish for my teacher to really be dead. And I will be honest with you. The last time I saw my teacher was a few hours before the assassination attempt. So, I cannot tell you whether my teacher is really dead or not, although I still have some fantasies in my heart. So, Mr. Gurod, if you want to capture me and kill me to silence me, that is up to you." Gurod sweated. "Don't joke around. I believe that someone like Sir Cavashir would not die so easily. All right, now tell me, why are you looking for me?" "It's very simple. Our empire has encountered a major change. In this change, may I ask, what position will the Lantis Kingdom take? It's been a long time since the monthly votes were brought up. Let's give a shout and smash those who have the vote. I just don't want the monthly votes to be too bad." To be continued. If you want to know what will happen, please go to www.chidian.com. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 236. Gior Chapter 222. Two routes, oh damn it! Following a panicked curse, A carriage that was stumbling along a rugged path finally broke because of the excessive load. With a boom, the carriage fell down horizontally. Immediately, the horse that was pulling the carriage let out a mournful cry and was pulled to its knees by its front hooves. The soldier driving the carriage cried out in shock and fell from his seat. There was a congested convoy in front and behind. The collapse of the carriage had blocked the road. This was the Anher County, located in the northeastern region of imperial capital Australia. As one of the few administrative regions within the empire that was still under the direct control of the central government, the Anher County was a mountainous region that was rich in firewood. This was a road that led to the imperial capital. The road was originally quite rugged. Additionally, due to the recent heavy rain, the road had become increasingly muddy and difficult to traverse. Due to the heavy rain, several parts of the mountain had collapsed, causing the road, which could barely be considered normal, to be blocked in many places. At this moment, an army was marching on the road. Due to the narrow terrain, they had to stretch out to a length of several li judging by the flag and the attire of the soldiers. This army included the local garrison troops of the Anher County. In addition, there were also garrison troops from the surrounding 3 counties. It appeared to be a mixed regiment. Judging by the size of this marching army, there were over 20,000 soldiers. Although they were marching as lightly as possible, a march of over 20,000 soldiers still required a considerable amount of supplies. Additionally, the road was difficult to traverse, increasing the difficulty of the march. This mixed regiment consisted of infantry. The soldiers struggled to move through the long line. Some of the soldiers used the spears in their hands as crutches. Under the strict orders of their officers, they were barely able to maintain the integrity of the line. However, there were still some straggling soldiers along the road. Due to the collapsed carriage blocking the road, chaos ensued. An officer shouted loudly as he tried to direct the soldiers to move the carriage to the side of the road. However, most of the soldiers were already exhausted. The officer shouted with all his might only to receive a feeble response. Most of the soldiers were covered in mud and sweat and their eyes were lifeless. Suddenly, a commotion broke out from the crowd. Next, several mounted soldiers parted the crowd to escort several war horses forward. A tall middle-aged man jumped down from his horse. Despite being covered in mud, the golden armor on his body still shone brightly. Only his damp hair stuck to his scalp and forehead. The large scar on his face that almost cut his face in half caused the surrounding soldiers to quieten down. It was clear that many people recognized this officer from his armor and appearance. Adrik shouted in a loud voice, "What happened, soldier?" When the officer who was sweating heard this, he subconsciously shouted anxiously, "Those who are not related to this, stay away. We were busy." Just as he turned his head, he saw the dignified Audiobook. His expression immediately changed and he opened his mouth. "Ah, sir, I didn't see you." "You did very well, young man." Audiobook strode over. His leather boots were covered in mud. He patted the officer's shoulder forcefully before jumping onto the carriage. Looking at the surrounding soldiers and their tired and dazed faces, Audiobook suddenly laughed out loud. His vigorous laughter spread far and wide. His loud and clear voice resounded throughout the entire battlefield. "Boys, soldiers, all of you listen up. Lao Tzu is Adrik. He is your general, the Vice Minister of Military Affairs. I know that everyone is tired. In fact, Lao Tzu is so tired that he is about to collapse. If there is a bed and a pillow here, I will fall asleep before I count to 10. Even if the emperor himself comes to kick my butt, he will not be able to wake Lao Tzu up. Ha!" Hearing that last sentence, the surrounding soldiers could not help but laugh out loud. "Everyone is tired. I am afraid that even if there is a beautiful woman standing in front of you, you will not have the strength to do anything, right? All right. What I want to say to you is, raise your heads. It is right in front of you, yes. Right in front. As long as we pass through the hillside in front, we will reach the plains. Can anyone tell me what is there? And Adrik's eyes were like lightning as he looked at the people around him. He pointed at the officer and said, "You speak." Yes, it is the imperial capital. It is Osgilla, sir," the officer nervously stammered. Yes, it is the imperial capital. It's Osgiria. Do you know what's waiting for us there? Audiobook roared. Do you know what's waiting for us there? It is a military order. It is His Majesty's order, and nonsense. It's all bullsh *t. Adrik scolded with a smile. He kicked the officer heavily. Then, under the confused gazes of the surrounding soldiers, he shouted, "Lao Tzu does not care about any military order. He does not care about His Majesty's command. However, I can tell you this. There is something good in Osgilla that you want. There is a warm bed. There is a dry blanket. There is also a hot meat soup. There is also a shiny gold coin. Furthermore, I guarantee that the ladies in Osgilla are 10 times more passionate than you guys think. Now, tell me, do you want to eat meat soup?" Yes. The surrounding voices were somewhat weak. Damn it. Answer me loudly. Although Lao Tzu did not eat lunch, my voice is much louder than all of you combined. Tell me, do you want the glittering gold coins? Those are the rewards from the imperial palace. Yes. The voices suddenly became much louder. Also, do you want to sleep with those passionate ladies in Osgilla? Yes. The voices suddenly became 10 times louder. At the same time, many brave soldiers hid in the crowd and shouted, "General, we want it even in our dreams." Ah. Good. Then work hard for Lao Tzu. First, move this damned carriage away. Then, raise your feet and stride forward. I am Adrik. I promise you that everything I said will be fulfilled when you reach the imperial capital. The crowd applauded loudly, and the atmosphere suddenly became lively. Audiobook jumped down from the carriage, waved his arms and shouted a few times. A group of soldiers rushed up like ants, and in a moment, the collapsed carriage was dismantled and moved to the side of the road. Adrik squeezed out of the crowd. Countless soldiers around him cheered for him. He patted many people's shoulders and then, surrounded by several officers, he got on his horse and continued to move forward. "Sir, your words just now seem to be unsuitable for your status," an adjutant cautiously reminded him. "Idiot." Adrik looked at the young adjutant beside him. The young adjutants beside him were all graduates from the Imperial Military Academy. Adrik snorted and said in a low voice, "What do you think I should say to them? The glory of a soldier? Loyalty to the Empire and His Majesty? The dignity of a military order? These soldiers, most of them are farmers who have just put down their hoes. Most of them don't even know how to write their own names. The furthest they have been in their lives is not more than 100 miles. What's the use of you talking to them about those dignified things?" He took a deep breath and looked at the young people beside him. These were all young people from the Imperial Military Academy. They were at the age when they were the most impulsive. They were the most hot-blooded and had a strong sense of justice and mission. They had endless love for the Empire and hated all despicable things. Their minds were filled with idealism and the spirit of sacrifice. The general lowered his voice and said in a low voice, "If you still want to follow me, then open your eyes and learn well. You have to understand your own soldiers first. You have to understand them first. Then, you have the qualifications to lead them. Do you understand?" Adrik's gaze made these young officers lower their heads in shame. Looking at the soldiers whose morale had been reinvigorated, these young officers had different expressions. They were all carefully thinking about the general's words. Adrik's promise quickly spread throughout the marching troop through the whispers of the soldiers. Seeing that the marching speed had increased, the officers were secretly convinced. Adrik's eyes were red and bloodshot. As the highest leader of this mixed regiment, he had only slept for less than 2 hours in the past 3 days, and he slept on the back of a horse. At this moment, his body was extremely tired. He knew how heavy the burden on his shoulders was. This mixed regiment was transferred from the surrounding counties. He had to lead this regiment to the imperial capital as soon as possible, to Osgilla. His Majesty had started a fire this time, and it was about to engulf the entire empire. And the imperial capital needed his protection. With all of Aderic's abilities, he had already transferred all of the elites from the local garrisons in the surrounding counties. But according to Aderic's standards, these elites of the local garrisons were clearly not even qualified. Because the military was controlled by the warlords, the military budget had been insufficient for many years. The local garrisons' armaments were in disarray and their personnel were in disarray. The regiment in his hand was already all the available troops that Adric could transfer from the imperial capital. He had thought of almost all the methods he could think of, almost like a shepherd holding a whip to lead this group of soldiers forward. But in the past 3 days, they had only moved a little more than 100 miles. This was already the limit of their speed. Many times, Adric had missed the iron army of the empire that he had once commanded, the tenacious, brave, and fearless Rodrian cavalry. He believed that as long as he gave the order, the Rodrian cavalry would bravely move forward. However, he was also very clear that he was not leading the 13th Cavalry Division, the most elite of the empire. Instead, he was leading a motley crew drawn from 3 counties. To be able to march at such a speed was far beyond the training limit of these guys. He rode all the way forward, constantly shouting to encourage the soldiers along the way. His voice was already hoarse, and when he drank water, even the saliva he spat out was bloodshot. Damn it, if only Fatso was here now. Adric cursed in a low voice. General, what did you say? The adjutant beside him asked doubtfully. Adric took a deep breath and looked at the sky in front of him. I miss an old friend, that guy was best at marching quickly. Roar certainly did not know that Adric was missing him endlessly. In fact, at this time, Fatso was also scratching his head in distress. His fat palm scratched his head hard as he looked at the map in front of him. Damn it! Roar cursed in a low voice. The problem faced by the 13th Corps was not easy. They had to rush to the capital immediately, but the problem was, their original station was in an area far away from the capital, and from their position to the capital, they had to pass through at least 2 counties of enemy-occupied territory. The so-called enemy-occupied territory was the area designated as Tima Military District. If it was in the past, when the army passed through, these governors would not openly rebel, and would at most send some troops along the way to supervise the Central Standing Corps. But now, the news from the capital had spread. Although the news he received was transmitted through the magic array, Roar was not sure whether these local military governors also knew about the changes in the capital. After all, 4 decades, the local governors and the warlord party had planted countless spies in the capital, and the slightest movement would spread across the continent. The current situation was, the royal family had completely broken off relations with the warlord party. Then, if he led the troops into the warlord party's territory, would he be strongly opposed by the other party? Although the combat power of the 13th Corps was strong, but the distance in front of them was more than 1,000 miles. Along the way were countless towns, cities, rivers, and even military fortresses. Rapid march. Or we can deploy the most elite troops, gather all the war horses and the military strength of the 2 main emblem regiments, throw away all the auxiliary troops, logistics and the other 2 emblem regiments. We can advance quickly and charge past them before they can react. This was the Crown Prince Garcia's suggestion. Moreover, it was obvious that this Crown Prince was not a military idiot. His suggestion was very detailed, and he had even calculated how much food and equipment each cavalryman would need to carry in order to maintain their speed, and at the same time not reduce their combat power to a dangerous level. The other adjutants and generals in the tent were very surprised. Could it be that after spending so much time with General Rohr, our crown prince had started to learn the style of this rabbit general? However, what was surprising was that Rohr, who had always been the best at rapid marching, or rather, the best at escaping, had rejected this suggestion, which was completely in line with his usual style. There will be 3 updates today. This is the first one, will continue at noon. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 237. GOR Chapter 223 Akai's Secret. Concentrate the entire army, concentrate all of our men. Logistics, support personnel, be it the cooks or grooms, not a single one of them is to be left behind. We will fight steadily and make our way to the imperial capital. There is no need for us to act like stray dogs. We will just push forward like this. That was Rohr's final decision. Looking into the crown prince's eyes, Rohr took a deep breath and slowly said, I have to do this. Do not forget, we only have 1 regiment. Additionally, due to the previous war, the 13th Corps has yet to recover to its peak state. At most, we only have 60% of the combat power we had before the war. Additionally, we only have 20,000 men. This number may appear to be quite high, but do not forget, we still need to pass through 2 counties occupied by the enemy. Those enemies may have already received news of what happened to the imperial capital. Thus, no matter how fast we run, we will not be able to catch up to the speed of the news. Thus, we cannot take the risk of advancing too quickly. What if those traitors attack us along the way? If we only bring along a small amount of equipment, we will only be able to fight 2 battles before running out of supplies. More importantly, do not forget, we are mounted soldiers. If the enemy uses a sturdy wall to stop us, we cannot let our mounted soldiers ram their heads against the wall. Advancing with 2 emblem regiments is too risky. It is likely that we will be besieged and intercepted by the enemy along the way and be completely wiped out. Garcia looked at Rohr. The crown prince had returned to his usual attire. He was in full military attire, not a single button was buttoned up. His hair was neat and his beard was clean. He calmly looked at Rohr and said, So, what do you think? General, you are more experienced than me. I believe in your judgment. Rohr nodded his head and said, We will concentrate our forces and push forward. If we divide our forces, the local warlords will start coveting us. However, if we have a complete roadrear cavalry regiment, I believe that those fellows will have to think twice before making a move on us. Although those fellows are in cahoots, I don't believe that the warlords of various regions don't have their own selfish motives, who would take the risk of harming themselves by fighting with us. These fellows aren't fools. If they were to fight us head-on and suffer heavy losses, they would lose their positions in their own groups. So, we are like a hand. We have to clench our fists and push forward, intimidate them and prevent them from taking advantage of the situation. I'm more than 50% sure that we'll be able to pass through safely. When the scholars of later generations studied this important event of the empire, they would give various comments on this interesting phenomenon. General Rohr, who was known for his speed in escaping and marching, was leading the most elite cavalry division of the empire, which was known for its high mobility. However, they gave up the idea of charging forward quickly. Instead, they huddled together and steadily moved closer to the capital like a hedgehog. On the other hand, General Adric, who was known for his bravery, meticulousness and steadiness in battle, was leading a mixed infantry division. He abandoned all the supplies that could be abandoned and marched quickly in an almost frenzied manner. This interesting phenomenon caused a heated discussion among military history researchers for many years after the event. And just as this great change, the prelude to this turbulent event, officially kicked off, and the entire continent was surging, outside the northern frontier of the empire, in the vast forest to the east of the wildfire plains, our country bumpkin was still circling in the woods. It's the third day. Akai, you didn't lead us on the wrong path, did you? The country bumpkin slapped his face hatefully, smashing a mosquito that tried to suck his blood into pieces. His palm was covered in blood, and he muttered a few curses in a low voice. The Zaku's youth, Akai, looked calm, but so calm that it was almost gloomy. In fact, as long as he did not speak, Shea really could not see what the young man's face looked like. Because the Zakus were generally dark-skinned, in Shea's view, these guys all looked the same, with a dark face. However, that little girl, Su Ling, was an exception. Along the way, this little girl was riding on the back of her Sika deer and chirping non-stop, like a little sparrow. She always liked to circle around Shea. She complained about the humidity in the air in the woods, complained that the day was too stuffy and made her sweat too much, complained that the night was too cold, complained that her delicate skin was bitten by mosquitoes and had bumps, complained that the food was too unpalatable, but she did not complain all the time. Occasionally, as long as Shea said a few words to her, this little girl would cheerfully let out a string of laughter. Even Shea had to admit that this little girl's laughter was really pleasant to listen to, like the most beautiful song of an oriole in the forest, crisp and full of spirit. However, the process of searching for the magic Kistaro, which originally only took more than 2 days, was still fruitless on the third day, and Shea gradually became a little impatient. According to the plan, they should have found what they were looking for the night before, returned to the Zaku's tribe to enjoy the fruit, wine, and tobacco of the Zakus, and then carried the gold gifted by the chief home. But now they were still going in circles in the woods. The Zaku's youth called Akai was becoming more and more silent. Every day, he silently led the way in front, rarely talking to Shea. Only when they were resting would he occasionally say a few words, but it was just short words like "rest well" or "stay alert." Shea noticed that every night when they were resting, this little boy would sit to the side and look at Su Ling with a complicated gaze. Usually, at this time, Su Ling would be next to Shea. Akai's gaze was also strange, and the time he spent peeking at Su Ling increased. Sometimes, his eyes revealed that he was hesitating about something, as if he was struggling with something in his heart. In the end, this gaze finally aroused Shea's suspicion. "This is the last day." Shea finally spoke. "Tomorrow is the 4th day. If we can't find what we're looking for by tomorrow night, we'll give up and go back to the tribe. We've already been out for 4 days, and we'll need 4 days to go back, so the round trip will take 8 days. We can't continue to waste time like this." He looked at Todoro and said, "I'm sorry, Todoro, but we can't stay here forever. If we can't find it, then we can only give up on your magic Kistaro." At this time, Todoro actually became magnanimous. The mage unexpectedly replied, "I have no objections, master. In any case, we want to return to Sir Merlin's side. If we can learn from Sir Merlin, who would care about that damn badge issued by the Magic Union? Humph. Wait until I've mastered magic, then I'll swagger back to the capital. Who would dare look down on me? When the time comes, they'll naturally obediently give me a magic badge. Who knows, maybe it'll even be a gold, advanced mage, badge?" "Fine." The silent Akai finally expressed his opinion. "Since this is your choice, I have nothing to say. In any case, I'm just a guide." When he said this, he couldn't help but stare at Su Ling for a while. He could see that this young man couldn't help but take a few deep breaths. There was a hint of struggle in his eyes, but in the end, he made up his mind. Shea secretly engraved this gaze into his heart. "Be careful, kid. There's something wrong with that Jack. Dora reminded him in his mind. Humph. Shea didn't respond. The next day, which was also the 4th day since they came out, the group of 4 continued to advance into the forest according to plan. After breakfast, Shea seemed to be very relaxed. He held a machete in his hand and walked beside Akai. From time to time, he would run to the side to look at the big trees next to him. Occasionally, he would break a blade of grass and bite it in his mouth. Sometimes, he would chase a pheasant in the bushes for a few steps. But in the morning, Shea suddenly caught up with Akai, who was swinging his machete to cut down the thorns. He used a lot of strength. When he pressed down, Akai's shoulders suddenly bent. Jack felt as if his shoulders were being clamped by an iron clamp. He felt a sharp pain and his arms went limp. He turned around and said, "What are you doing?" Shea harumphed and pushed Akai heavily to the ground. He stepped forward and before Akai could struggle, he stepped on Akai's machete. He looked down at the young man and said, "Kid, what are you doing?" "Me?" Jack's eyes changed and he shook his head. "I don't understand what you're saying." Shea harumphed and bent down. He stared into the young man's eyes and grinned, revealing his white teeth. "Oh? You don't understand? Hey, what are you doing?" Su Ling ran over and led her deer to Shea's side. She pulled on Shea's arm and asked, "What are you doing? Why did you push Akai down?" Shea suppressed his anger and turned to look at Su Ling. "Shut up, little girl." His eyes were too sharp, and Su Ling couldn't help but shrink back in fear. But then she looked at Akai on the ground, clenched her teeth, and continued forward. She grabbed Shea's arm and tried to pull him away. "Get out of the way. Don't bully Akai. He's my friend." "Friend?" Shea snorted. "Your friend obviously has an unspeakable secret. What's even more obvious is that he's taking us on a detour. The next chapter will be at 6 tonight. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 238. GOR Chapter 224 Objective. Snake Slayer. Su Ling was stunned. She looked at Akai who was lying on the ground and asked, "Is that so, Akai?" Akai closed his mouth and looked at Su Ling's sparkling eyes. At the same time, the Zakuri youngster closed his eyes as well. "Although I'm not a Zakuri, nor am I a child of the mountains." Shea's tone was full of mockery. "But I'm also not an outsider who knows nothing about the mountains. Do you understand? I have been living in the mountains since I was young. So, do you really think I am that easy to deceive?" Shea gently raised his hand to stop Su Ling. Next, he grabbed Akai's leather jacket and lifted him up. He moved closer to Akai's nose and stared into Akai's eyes. "I have been suspecting you for the past 2 days. However, I am not a Zakuri. Thus, I was unable to see through your tricks. Thankfully, today I am finally able to see through your trick." He paused for a moment before continuing. "First, you have been leading us around. If it were someone else, they might have been deceived by you. Ever since we crossed the river on the 2nd day and entered the wild forest you mentioned, you've been leading us on a folded route for the rest of the time. Although we've been walking for 4 days, the distance we've covered in a straight line is only a few dozen li at most. Am I right? I was just leading us to find something. Since it is a search, it is only natural that we cannot walk in a straight line. We need to expand our search area as much as possible," Akai explained. "Yes, that was what I thought in the beginning." The sneer on Shea's face froze. "I also thought that we were going around in circles in order to find the magic Kistaro. However, I was careless and discovered your little trick." After saying that, Shea wiped his neck twice and harumphed. "From the moment we entered the wild forest, the insect repellent you gave us became useless. In the beginning, I felt that it was strange. Why are the insects here getting stronger? Even the mosquito repellent you gave me was useless. But now I understand that what you gave me wasn't an insect repellent herb. Unfortunately, I once walked with your uncle, Ozwa, and he told me that as long as you squeeze out the juice from at least 3 types of flowers, you can effectively drive away those annoying mosquitoes. But the one you gave us wasn't any of those 3. Shea paused and glanced at Akai. Don't tell me that your drug is better. Do you still remember what I asked you 2 nights ago? You said that other herbs could only be found in the southern part of the forest. This is the northern part of the forest, so there are no other herbs. But unfortunately, when I was chasing the pheasants in the grass this morning, I found those insect-repellent flowers. These things weren't hard to find, they were plentiful. As the son of the mountain, you wouldn't make such a low-level mistake, would you? Fine. Akai straightened her neck. Even if I made a mistake with the insect-repellent herbs, so what? You can only say that my ability in this area is too mediocre. What evidence do you have to say that I did something? There are 2 reasons. Shea took a breath. Today, I deliberately went around in the forest. Can you guess what I was looking for? Let me tell you, I was looking for snakes. That's right, I found them. Do you know what I found? I found that the snakes I found were actually not afraid of me. I casually walked past them, but the snakes didn't seem to react. I think it must be the smell of the insect repellent you gave me that had a wonderful effect. The things you applied on us for the past 2 days weren't for insect repellent. It was to prevent us from being attacked by the snakes. Isn't that right? To prevent us from being attacked by the snakes? I thought about it carefully for a while. Little guy, I just happen to know a type of flower that snakes like the most. Akai closed her mouth. Shea glanced at her and continued. The second reason, I found that you were making marks along the way. You did it very cleverly. You didn't stupidly draw some pictures on the tree bark or leave something behind as a mark, but, there is something wrong with your knife. He picked up Akai's knife and brought the blade to his nose to sniff it. His eyes lit up. Haha, what is it? Fruit syrup mixed with honey, right? That is a very clever way of doing things. You cut down the trees and brambles to open up a path for us, and in the process of cutting down, you left the fruit syrup and honey on the brambles along the way. There are many wild bees in this forest, and those things will be attracted by the honey and fruit syrup. In the end, they will become natural road signs. Akai finally sighed. He raised his eyes to look at Shea and said in a bitter tone, I admit, you seem to know a lot about the things in the mountain. You are different from the other outsiders. You're right, fruit juice and honey, but there's also a kind of snake's saliva that emits a smell that can't be detected by our noses. Only insects can smell it. Oh, you admit it. Shea smiled. Then, tell me, who are you leading the way for? Why did you leave these markings along the way? Who are you trying to track us? Hearing their conversation, Su Ling was stunned. Her eyes widened as she looked at the 2 of them. Suddenly, she screamed, Akai! You really did that? Why did you do that? Akai sighed. The young man turned to look at Su Ling and hesitated. Su Ling, I don't mean any harm. These are the orders of the head chief. The night before we left, the head chief summoned me alone. I swore on my uncle's name that I would do these things for the head chief. So, you really shouldn't have sneaked here. Su Ling opened her mouth and stared blankly. Akai turned to look at Shea. Sir, please put me down. I didn't mean to do this, Shea let go of Akai and put him on the ground. He patted Akai's clothes and smiled faintly. You don't need to be afraid. I won't hurt you because Ozwa is your uncle. Ozwa sacrificed his life to save me. I owe him. So, as long as you tell me the truth, I won't blame you. The young man's expression was complicated. He gulped and looked at Su Ling. After hesitating for a while, he sighed. Fine. Mister, you're actually here for the holy snake, right? The great chieftain told me that you are here to help us. You are friends. You are here to help us deal with the holy snake, right? I did make that promise to your uncle. Shea nodded solemnly. His eyes were firm. For your uncle, I will do my best. Akai was relieved. That's what the head chief told me. But he didn't say anything in front of you because of some special reasons. Regarding the sacred snake, the head chief told me that our tribe doesn't have the same opinion. So, the head chief didn't make a decision in front of everyone. Because of some other reasons, he couldn't announce it in front of everyone. Shea nodded. Some other reasons? You don't understand. Although the head chief is the leader of our tribe, he has to listen to the head priest's opinion on many things. The head priest has the power to divine us and the head priest. More importantly, the head priest also has the power to communicate with the head priest. When it comes to the sacred snake, the head chief and the head priest's attitude has always been completely opposite. Shea glanced at Todoro. The two of them looked at each other. Shea continued, So you're saying that the head priest in your tribe is against the sacred snake? The head priest thinks that we should continue to submit to the sacred snake. To Shea's surprise, the one who answered this question was Su Ling. This girl's face was filled with anger. She shouted, I hate that guy. He's always sneaking around. He's just being selfish. Because only with the sacred snake's existence can he have his current position. The head priest is responsible for communicating with the sacred snake and listening to the sacred snake's every command. That guy will only watch as our brothers and sisters are devoured by that big monster. There was a reason for Su Ling's anger. It was because she was one of the victims of the upcoming Snake Woman selection. If we make a public decision in the tribe, or if we make it public, Akai said in a low voice, the head priest is worried that it will cause the head priest to object. That guy might do something behind the scenes. So we can only disguise ourselves. It's like hunting. We can't startle the prey. We can only circle around it and quietly approach it. Understood, so we asked to enter the forest to look for the magic Kistaro, and the great tribal chief happily agreed. In fact, he was taking advantage of the opportunity to let you take us into the forest, and then, Shea's eyes suddenly widened. You didn't want to directly take us to the holy snake and ask us to slaughter that monster, right? According to the season, now is the time for it to hibernate. It's also the best opportunity. Akai clenched her teeth. Moreover, isn't that why you came here? You promised. Also, we won't let you do it alone. The head priest has already secretly transferred a group of the tribe's most elite warriors. They will leave the tribe in the name of hunting and meet up with us in the depths of the forest. I left these markings on the way so that those warriors can follow our path. We will meet up in the end. Then we will form a team to kill the snake. We will kill that monster together and save our tribe. Shea sighed and looked at Akai with a much more polite gaze. Then why did you take us on a detour for 2 days? Why didn't you tell me this earlier? Isn't it because of Su Ling? Akai smiled bitterly. This is a dangerous matter. Su Ling suddenly caught up with us and messed up the plan. I tried to persuade her to go back, but she refused. But bringing her with us is too dangerous. So I've been hesitating for the past 2 days. To be clear, today's 10,000-word update is not an outburst. It's just to make up for what I owe. Of course, I'm not done yet. I'll continue tomorrow. Also, please recommend me. To be continued. If you want to know the future, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.